Ethan Carter set the invoice down on the polished table, and then he did something no one in that room expected. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out his aircraft certification card, the one that made him legally responsible for whether a jet lived or died in the sky, and laid it flat beside the paper they refused to pay. "There," he said quietly. "Now it's not my name keeping that plane in the air anymore." He turned and walked out. 3 hours later, the most powerful aviation company in the state had a $50 million jet on the tarmac, a merger deadline burning down to zero, and not a single pilot on Earth willing to climb into the cockpit. Because every logbook said the same 6 words, and those 6 words were about to bring an empire to its knees. Before we go further, tell me in the comments what city you're watching from right now so I can see how far this story has traveled. And if you believe a man's word should still mean something in this world, do me a favor and subscribe because you're going to want to see how this one ends. The lobby of Black Ridge Executive Airfield had marble floors that cost more than Ethan Carter made in a year, and every step he took across them echoed like a countdown. He was 58 years old. 31 of those years he'd spent with his hands inside engines. His knuckles scarred his back, aching from bending over turbines in hangars that froze in winter and cooked in summer. He'd raised a daughter alone since she was 6. He'd buried a wife too young. He'd never once in all those years signed his name to a repair he didn't believe in. And now he was walking into a conference room full of men in suits who had decided before he even arrived that they weren't going to pay him. "Mr. Carter." Miles Voss stood at the head of the table, arms crossed, not offering a hand. "Sit down." "I'll stand," Ethan said. "This won't take long." He set the invoice on the table, slid it forward with 2 fingers. $412,000. 6 weeks of labor. Parts he'd tracked down himself when the company's suppliers came up empty. Nights he'd spent under that Gulf Stream when everyone else had gone home. Voss didn't look at it. "We've reviewed your work." "Have you?" "There are concerns." Voss glanced at the 2 men beside him. Lawyers Ethan could smell it on them. "Delays. Cost overruns. You took twice as long as we projected." Ethan's jaw tightened, but his voice stayed level. "You projected 3 weeks on a jet that had its hydraulics gutted and half its maintenance history missing. I told you that first week. It's in my report. I sent it to you personally." "What I have," Voss said, sliding a folder across the table, "is a summary that says you were slow, expensive, and difficult to work with. That's what went to the CEO. That's what the board saw." Ethan opened the folder, read the first page, read the second. His face didn't move, but something behind his eyes went cold and quiet, the way water goes still right before it freezes. "This isn't my report," he said. "It's the company's report." "It's a lie." One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Carter, I'd advise you to be careful with that word." Ethan looked up slowly. He looked at the lawyer, then at the other lawyer, then at Miles Voss, who was watching him with the faint, patient smile of a man who has already won and knows it. "You brought lawyers?" Ethan said, "to a payment meeting." "We brought counsel," Voss corrected, "because we anticipated you might be unreasonable. Now, here's where we are." He leaned forward, planting both hands on the table. "The company is prepared to offer you a settlement. $90,000. In exchange, you sign the certification, you release us from any further claims, and we all move on. That jet needs to be in the air Thursday morning. There's a merger closing. People far above your pay grade are counting on that aircraft being ready." "90,000," Ethan repeated it flatly. "On a $400,000 invoice." "It's a generous offer considering the performance issues." "There are no performance issues." Ethan's voice didn't rise. That was the thing about him he'd learned decades ago, that the men who shouted were the men who had nothing. "There's a jet that came to me broken and half-documented, and I did the job right. And now you want my signature so you can put people in the sky Thursday morning. That's the job, Mr. Carter." "No." Ethan closed the folder. "The job is making sure that plane doesn't come apart at 40,000 feet. The signature just tells the world that a man who knows what he's doing checked. And you want me to sell that signature for $90,000. Voss's smile thinned. I want you to be practical. You're a single father. I did my homework. You've got a second mortgage, a truck that's about to die, and a daughter in nursing school. $90,000 solves a lot of problems for a man in your situation." The room went very quiet. Ethan looked at him for a long moment, and when he spoke his voice was softer than before, which somehow made it worse. "You looked into my daughter. I looked into your finances. It's due diligence. You sat in your office and you looked up my little girl's school." Ethan nodded slowly, as if a piece had just clicked into place. "And you thought there's a man who's tired. There's a man who's scared. There's a man who'll take the 90 and be grateful. I think you're a reasonable man who understands his position." "I understand my position exactly." Ethan reached into his shirt pocket, and there it was, the moment none of them saw coming. He pulled out his certification card, federal seal in the corner, his name across the front. The document that made him legally the last line of defense between that aircraft and the graveyard, the thing he'd carried for 31 years. He set it on the table flat right next to the invoice they wouldn't pay. "You keep the 90,000, Ethan said. "You keep the report you wrote with my name on it, and you keep that jet." Voss frowned. "What are you doing?" "I'm revoking my certification of that aircraft, as of right now, in front of witnesses." He glanced at the lawyers. "Two witnesses, conveniently, that plane has no valid sign-off. No inspection I'll stand behind. Nothing keeping it legal to fly except a piece of paper you're apparently very good at forging." He straightened his jacket. "You want that Gulfstream in the sky Thursday morning. Then find a man willing to put his name on it. Find a man who'll bet his license, his livelihood, his family, everything he's built that a jet he never touched is safe." Ethan let that land. "Good luck." He turned to leave. "Carter." Voss's voice had lost its patience. "You walk out that door, you don't get paid. Not 90, not anything. And I'll make sure every operator in this state knows you're difficult to work with. You'll never turn a wrench for a real outfit again." Ethan stopped at the door. He didn't turn around. "Mr. Voss," he said, "you've spent this whole meeting trying to figure out what I'm afraid of. Let me save you the trouble. I'm not afraid of losing the money. I've been broke before. Broke doesn't scare me. I'm not afraid of your phone calls to other operators because a man's reputation is what he does when nobody's paying him, and I did the job right." He finally looked back over his shoulder. "The only thing that ever scared me was signing my name to something that kills people. And you just found out you can't buy that. Not for 90,000, not for 9 million. He walked out. The marble floor echoed under his boots, that same countdown, all the way to the door. His truck did in fact need work. It coughed twice before the engine caught, and Ethan sat in the airfield parking lot for a moment with his hands on the wheel, breathing. $400,000. Gone. Just like that. He thought about his daughter Grace, about the tuition payment due in 11 days, about the second mortgage, and the way his back had started giving out on cold mornings, and the fact that 58 was not a good age to be starting over. He'd done the math 100 times in that conference room. He knew exactly what walking away cost him, and he'd walked away anyway. His phone buzzed, a text from Lena Brooks, his assistant, 34 years old, sharp as a scalpel, the best diagnostic mind he'd worked with in a decade. "How'd it go?" "They pay up." Ethan stared at the message. Then he typed back. "No. I gave the plane back." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "You did what call you tonight?" He put the phone down and pulled out of the lot. He didn't know yet. Couldn't have known that the 6 weeks he'd spent under that Gulfstream had left behind something far more dangerous than an unpaid invoice. He didn't know that inside that jet was a secret worth killing a merger over. But he was about to find out. Because they weren't going to let him walk away that easy. The phone rang at 9 that night. Ethan was at his kitchen table, a cup of coffee going cold, the bills spread out in front of him like a hand of cards he couldn't win. It wasn't Lena. It was Voss. "Carter." No greeting. "I'm going to give you one more chance to be smart. It's late miles. The jet's fueled. We're running it Thursday. I've got 3 pilots on rotation and a merger that closes at noon." A pause. And I've got a problem. Ethan almost smiled. Do you? The first pilot pulled up the logbook. Saw your discrepancy note. Saw your certification pulled. Voss's voice had an edge now, a thin crack running through all that earlier confidence. He won't fly it. Says there's an open safety item with no sign-off. Says he's not putting his name on top of a blank. Sounds like a good pilot. So I called the second guy. Contract pilot flies anything, doesn't ask questions. A longer pause. He asked questions. He read the same page. He walked. Ethan leaned back in his chair. Outside, a truck passed on the road, headlights sweeping the wall. You're calling me, Ethan said slowly, because you can't find a pilot. I'm calling you because I need that certification signed and you're going to sign it. Tonight. I'll wire the full 412. Right now. I'll even add a bonus. Just come back, put your name on the sheet, and we forget the last 2 weeks ever happened. And there it was. The thing Ethan had understood in that conference room that Voss was only now beginning to grasp. It was never about the money. It had never for 1 second been about the money. Miles, Ethan said gently, why won't the pilots fly it? Silence. Come on, you know why. 2 professional pilots, one of them a guy who flies anything, and they both looked at that logbook and walked away rather than climb in. Why? Because your note scared them. Because you left an open item to sabotage me. No. Ethan's voice hardened. They walked because pilots aren't stupid. A pilot reads a logbook the way a man reads a rattlesnake, and when they saw an open safety discrepancy that nobody qualified had closed out, they knew exactly what that meant. It meant somebody somewhere didn't want to look at what was wrong with that airplane. He paused. So here's my question, Miles. And I want you to think real hard before you answer. What's actually wrong with that jet? What did I find that you don't want signed off? The silence on the line stretched so long that Ethan thought the call had dropped. Then Voss said very quietly in a voice Ethan had never heard him use before. You need to drop this, Carter. For your own sake. Take the money, sign the paper, and forget you ever heard the words Vanguard Aero Supply. The line went dead. Ethan sat there for a long time, the phone still in his hand. Vanguard Aero Supply. He'd only mentioned that name once in a private note buried in a report he'd sent to Voss and no one else. A note about a flight control component with no legitimate serial record. A part that shouldn't exist. A part installed in exactly the place where if it failed, the pilot wouldn't be able to do a single thing to save the plane. Ethan had flagged it, documented it, refused to sign off around it, and Voss had just told him to forget the name. Which meant Voss knew. Ethan stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the dark yard and the dying truck, and the whole small, careful life he'd built with his own 2 hands. Then he picked up his phone and called Lena. She answered on the first ring. Please tell me you're not actually walking away from 400 grand. Lena, I need you to pull every record you can find on a supplier. Vanguard Aero Supply. Purchase orders, shipping manifests, ownership, everything. And I need you to be careful about how you do it. A pause. Careful how? Careful like nobody knows you're looking. Ethan? Her voice changed. What's going on? Voss just called me. Offered me the full amount plus a bonus to come sign off tonight. Full 412 after telling me to my face I'd get nothing. Ethan watched his own reflection in the dark glass. A man doesn't jump from 90,000 to 400 and a bonus in one day because his conscience got the better of him. He does it because he's scared, and Miles Voss just told me the thing he's scared of. Which is, that plane can't fly Thursday without my signature, not because of some paperwork rule, because there's something wrong with it that a real pilot can see the shadow of just from reading the logbook. And Voss needs my name on top of it so that if it comes apart, Ethan stopped. Started again. So that if it comes apart, it's my name on the sign-off. My license. My fault. Not his. Lena was quiet for a moment. You think he'd put people in a plane he knows is compromised? I think he's got a merger closing at noon Thursday, and he's decided the plane will probably be fine. Ethan's hand tightened on the phone. And probably fine is the 2 most dangerous words in this entire business. Okay. He could hear her already moving, the sound of a laptop opening. Okay. Vanguard Aero Supply. I'm on it. But Ethan, if this is what you think it is, if they falsified serials on a flight control part, that's not a billing dispute. That's federal. That's people going to prison. I know. That's people who don't want to go to prison. People with lawyers and money and reasons to make problems disappear. I know that too. Then why are we doing this? You gave the plane back. You're clear. You could take the 400 grand right now, sign whatever, and this stops being your problem. Ethan closed his eyes. He thought about the two pilots who'd walked. Good men, men with families who'd looked at that logbook and trusted the note he'd left, trusted that if Ethan Carter flagged something, it mattered. He thought about a third pilot who might not read as carefully. A co-pilot. Passengers. A merger full of people who'd board a $50 million jet Thursday morning, assuming that somewhere, some tired old mechanic had done his job right. He thought about his signature, what it meant, what it had always meant. Because Ethan said 31 years ago, I put my name on a card that says I'm the one who checks. And a lot of people are still alive today because I took that seriously when it would have been easier not to. He opened his eyes. I'm not going to stop taking it seriously now that it's finally going to cost me something. There was a silence on the line. Then Lena softer. You're a stubborn old man, you know that. So I've been told. Give me till morning. If Vanguard's dirty, I'll find the thread. Pull it gently. Ethan. She hesitated. Watch your back. A man who calls at 9 at night offering $400,000, he's not going to take no for an answer twice. She hung up. Ethan stood at the window a while longer. Somewhere across the county at Black Ridge Executive Airfield, a $50 million jet sat fueled and waiting on a dark tarmac, its logbook open to a page that had just cost 2 pilots their willingness to fly, and one company its schedule. And on that page, in Ethan's own careful handwriting, sat the note that had started all of it. An open safety discrepancy. A part that shouldn't exist, a serial number that led nowhere. Below it, where his signature should have been, there was nothing. Just a blank space where a man's name used to mean the difference between a jet that flew and a jet that fell. Ethan turned off the kitchen light. He gathered up the bills he couldn't pay and stacked them neatly the way he did everything. And he went to bed knowing that tomorrow the men who'd tried to buy him were going to realize they'd made a serious mistake. They'd thought they were dealing with a desperate man. They were dealing with an honest one. And an honest man who has nothing left to lose is the most dangerous thing in the world. Across town, Miles Voss was still awake too. Sitting in his dark office, staring at a purchase order he should have shredded years ago, a phone in his hand that he kept picking up and putting down. Because he'd just realized the same thing Ethan had. The old mechanic wasn't going to sign. The pilots weren't going to fly, and there were only 40 hours left until a merger worth more than everything Miles Voss had ever stolen closed at noon. 40 hours, one grounded jet, and one man standing in the way who couldn't be bought, couldn't be scared, and couldn't be stopped. Miles set the phone down, picked it back up, and dialed a number he'd promised himself he'd never call again. "It's Voss," he said when a voice answered. "We've got a problem with the mechanic." A pause. "No, he won't take the money." Voss rubbed his eyes. "He gave the certification back, left the card on the table, and now I've got no pilot willing to touch the aircraft, and if this thing doesn't fly Thursday—" He stopped, listened. His face went pale in the glow of the desk lamp. "I'm not saying that," he said quickly. "I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying we need to handle it, quietly. Get his signature or get him to—" He listened again. Longer this time, and when Miles Voss finally spoke, his voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Let me think about it," he said. "Just let me think." He hung up. Outside his window, the Gulfstream sat on the tarmac, under the floodlights gleaming and silent and grounded, waiting for a signature that a single honest father had already decided would never come. Morning came hard and cold, and Ethan Carter was already awake when the phone rang at 6:14. It was Lena. She didn't say hello. "Are you sitting down?" I'm standing at my coffee maker. Why? Sit down. He sat. Talk to me. Vanguard Aero Supply. He heard papers shuffling the fast clatter of her keyboard. I pulled the incorporation filings first, like you said. Quiet back channels, nobody knows I'm looking. Ethan, this company was registered 11 years ago. Delaware Shell. One name on the founding paperwork before it got buried under 3 other holding companies. Whose name? That's the thing. I can't get to it directly. Somebody scrubbed it. But I found the registered agent, and the registered agent handles 4 other companies, and one of those 4 other companies. She paused, and he could hear her breathing quicken. One of those 4 leases office space at Black Ridge Executive Airfield, Suite 300. Ethan set his coffee down slowly. Whose suite is 300? Operations. Voss. Miles Voss's office is Suite 300. Lena's voice dropped. Ethan, the man who's been buying parts for that jet, is buying them from a company that traces back to his own office. He's selling parts to himself. And I haven't even gotten to the invoices yet. Ethan closed his eyes. 31 years in this business, and it still made him sick every single time when he found it. The rot. The quiet, patient rot that started with one man deciding a number on a page mattered more than a life at 40,000 feet. How much, he said. How much has he moved through Vanguard? I'm still counting. A long silence, then quieter. It's in the millions, Ethan, and that's just what I can see. Get me the invoices, everyone you can pull without leaving a trail. Already working on it, but listen, she hesitated. There's something weird. I found a purchase order for a flight control servo. Vanguard sold it to Ashcroft Aviation for $260,000. $260,000 Ethan for a part that lists at maybe 40, and the serial number on the invoice doesn't match anything, Ethan finished. Because I already found the part. It's in the jet. It's the thing I flagged. It's the thing that made me pull my card. The line went silent. That's the part that would make the plane uncontrollable if it failed, Lena said. It wasn't a question. That's the part. Then he didn't just overcharge for it. He put a counterfeit flight control component into a $50 million jet and pocketed the difference. Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, with fury. Ethan, that's not fraud. People fly in that thing. I know. That's attempted, that's... I know, Lena. He stood up, pacing now, the phone hot against his ear. That's why he needs my signature so bad. If that plane flies and nothing happens, he's fine. Nobody looks, the merger closes, everybody gets rich. But if my name's on the sign-off, and it does fail, then it's not counterfeit parts and fraud that killed those people. It's a mechanic who missed something. It's me. He's not buying my signature to fly the plane. He's buying somebody to blame. He heard Lena exhale, long and slow. So, what do we do? Ethan stopped pacing. He looked out the window at the gray morning, at the truck that wouldn't start half the time, at the whole small life that $90,000 would have made so much easier. We don't do anything you can get hurt for, he said. You send me what you've got and then you step back. This is mine now. Absolutely not. Lena, you're a 58-year-old mechanic with a bad back and a dead truck, she said. You don't know how to trace a shell company or pull a shipping manifest or read a Delaware filing. I do. So you can either work with me or you can watch me do it alone and worse. Those are your 2 options, old man. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. You're as stubborn as I am. I learned from the best. Now get dressed. I'm coming over. And I'm bringing my laptop and about 400 pages of invoices because we've got a merger closing tomorrow at noon, and I think we just found the reason a man might do something desperate to stop us. She hung up before he could argue. Ethan stood there a moment. Then he set down the phone, and for the first time since he'd walked out of that conference room, he felt something in his chest that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite anger. It was the feeling of a man who has finally seen the whole shape of the thing he's up against. And it was bigger than he'd thought. Lena arrived 40 minutes later with a bag of documents and 2 large coffees, and the look of a person who hadn't slept. She spread everything across Ethan's kitchen table, pushing the unpaid bills aside without comment. and she started laying it out for him 1 page at a time. Okay, here's the pattern. She pointed. Every 12 to 18 months, Ashcroft Aviation grounds a jet for maintenance. Standard. Every airline does it. But every single time one of Voss's aircraft goes down for work, Vanguard Aero Supply shows up as the parts supplier. And every single time the parts are billed at 3, 4, 5 times market value. Skimming. Skimming on a scale I've never seen. But that's not the scary part. She pulled out another page. The scary part is the serials. Look, every one of these high-value parts has a serial number, right? Flight control components, avionics, hydraulic actuators. And when I run the serials against the manufacturer databases, they don't exist. They don't exist. Or worse, they belong to scrapped parts. Ethan, some of these serials trace back to components that were officially destroyed, written off, melted down, and somehow they're showing up installed in flying aircraft. Ethan sat back. His coffee had gone cold again. He didn't notice. He's buying junk, he said slowly. He's buying scrapped parts or counterfeits or parts pulled out of the trash, slapping fake serials on them and installing them in jets, and billing the company full price plus a markup for certified new components, and pocketing the difference through Vanguard. How many aircraft? Lena went still. Lena, how many aircraft? She turned her laptop toward him. On the screen was a list. A long list. I found the pattern in 4 jets before I stopped counting, she said quietly. But the supplier relationship goes back 11 years. Ethan, if he's been doing this the whole time, if every one of these maintenance cycles put counterfeit parts into the fleet, then it's not one jet. Ethan's voice had gone flat and cold. It's the whole fleet. It's the whole fleet. The two of them sat there in the kitchen in the gray morning light, staring at a list of aircraft that flew executives and clients and families across the country every single day, each one of them possibly carrying inside it a part that had no right to exist, waiting for the one flight where it decided to fail. Ethan stood up so fast, his chair scraped the floor. We have to tell someone. Tell who? Lena spread her hands. The company Voss is the company as far as maintenance goes. The FAA, we've got shell company filings and serial number mismatches. That's a 6-month investigation before anybody grounds anything. And the merger closes tomorrow at noon. By the time anybody official moves, that jet's already flown, the deal's already done, and Voss has already shredded every piece of paper that points at him. Then we go over Voss's head. Lena frowned. To who? Ethan was already reaching for his phone. There's one person Voss can't fire. One person who signs the checks and answers to the board and would burn her own company to the ground before she'd let it fly a jet that kills people. He scrolled through his contacts, found the number he'd been given at the start of the job, the one he'd never expected to use. The CEO, Vivian Ashcroft. Lena grabbed his wrist. Ethan, wait. Think about this. Voss has been feeding her reports for weeks, reports that say you're slow, expensive, difficult. She's got a whole file on you that says you're the problem. You call her out of nowhere, a mechanic she's been told to distrust, and you tell her her operations director is running an 11-year fraud that's put counterfeit parts in her whole fleet. She'll think I'm crazy. She'll think you're a disgruntled contractor who didn't get paid and is trying to burn the company on your way out the door. Lena let go of his wrist, which from where she's sitting is exactly what it'll look like. Ethan lowered the phone. She was right. He knew she was right. Voss had spent weeks building the exact story that would make anything Ethan said sound like sour grapes. The slow mechanic, the expensive mechanic, the difficult mechanic who walked out over money and now wanted revenge. So we can't go to the company, we can't go to the government, and we can't go to the CEO, Ethan said. What's left? Lena looked at the documents spread across the table, at the invoices, the serials, the 11 years of quiet, patient rot. Proof, she said. Proof so clean that it doesn't matter what story Voss told. Proof she can't argue with. We don't go to Vivian Ashcroft with a theory. We go to her with the part. Ethan looked up. The counterfeit servo. The one in the jet. Lena's eyes were bright. It's still installed. Right now, tonight, it's sitting in that Gulfstream on the tarmac. If we can get to it, if we can pull the serial photograph it document the chain from Vanguard's invoice to the physical part in the aircraft, then it doesn't matter what Voss says about you. You put a real counterfeit life-threatening component in Vivian Ashcroft's hand, with an invoice showing her own operations director sold it to her for $260,000, and she'll ground the whole fleet before lunch. Ethan was quiet a moment. You want to go into Blackridge Airfield, he said slowly, onto the tarmac, into a jet that Voss has fueled and guarded, and is planning to fly at noon tomorrow and pull a part out of it. I want you to. You're the only one who can. You know exactly where it is. You installed everything around it. You can get in, pull the serial document it, and get out in 20 minutes. She swallowed. And I'll get you the credentials to get through the gate. Your access badge is still active. Voss never revoked it because revoking it would have meant filing paperwork that admitted you were on the job. Ethan stared at her. You've been thinking about this all night, he said. I have. It's breaking and entering. It's trespassing on a corporate airfield. If Voss catches me on that tarmac after I walked off the job, he doesn't need to frame me for anything. He's got me dead to rights. I know. They could arrest me. They could ruin me. Grace is 11 days from a tuition payment I can't make, and if I get arrested tonight... He stopped. His jaw worked. If I get arrested tonight, what happens to her? Lena didn't answer right away. When she did, her voice was soft. Ethan, what happens to the people on that plane tomorrow if you don't? And there it was. The question that had followed him out of that conference room, down the marble floor, all the way home. The question that had kept him awake half the night. The question that no amount of tuition or bills or bad backs or dead trucks could ever quite outweigh. He'd built a whole life on the answer to that question. Get me the badge, Ethan said. The plan came together fast, and it came together ugly, the way real plans do when there's no time and no money and no room for error. Lena would drive. Ethan would go in. He knew the airfield's rhythms. The shift change at the maintenance hangar happened at 10 p.m., a 15-minute window when the night crew took over from the day crew, and nobody was quite watching the tarmac. His badge would get him through the outer gate. From there, it was 200 yards of open ground to the jet, and if anyone stopped him, he was just the mechanic back to grab a tool he'd left behind. It was thin. Ethan knew it was thin, but thin was all they had. At 4 in the afternoon, while they were going over it for the third time, Ethan's phone buzzed with an email. He almost ignored it. Then he saw the sender. Ashcroft Aviation Legal Department. Lena. He turned the phone toward her. Look at this. She read it over his shoulder, and as she read, her face changed. That's not possible, she said. Read it out loud. I want to make sure I'm not losing my mind. She took the phone. Mr. Carter, per the terms of your service contract dated. Okay, it lists the date. You agreed to complete all restoration work on the referenced aircraft by the 15th of this month and to assume full liability for any discrepancies not resolved by that date. As you failed to complete the work and failed to certify the aircraft, Ashcroft Aviation reserves the right to pursue damages for breach of contract, including, but not limited to, the cost of the merger disruption caused by your abandonment of the project. Ethan went very still. Ethan, Lena said slowly, your contract didn't have a liability clause. I read it. I filed it. There was no completion deadline of the 15th. There was no assumption of liability. That's not the contract you signed. No, Ethan said. It's not. They changed it. She looked up at him, and the color had drained from her face. They went back and they altered your contract after the fact. They added a deadline you missed and a liability clause you never agreed to, and now they're setting you up to sue you for the whole merger, for abandoning the project when you walked because they refused to pay you. He's covering all his angles. Ethan set the phone down carefully, the way you set down something you might otherwise throw. If I stay quiet, he flies the plane and blames me if it fails. If I make noise, he sues me for the merger and buries me in legal fees I can't pay. Either way, the story's the same. The difficult mechanic. The guy who couldn't do the job. The guy who walked out and left everyone holding the bag. He looked up. He's not just protecting himself. He's making me the villain of his story. And a jury full of people who don't know a servo from a sandwich is going to believe a CEO's operations director over a broke mechanic every single time. Lena sank into a chair. "This is bigger than I thought," she said quietly. "He's not improvising. He's got lawyers. He's got a paper trail he's building in real time. He changed a signed contract, Ethan. People don't do that unless they've done it before, unless they know exactly how it works." 11 years, Ethan said. "You said the fraud goes back 11 years. You think this is the first time he's had to make a problem disappear?" The question hung in the air between them, and then Lena said the thing that neither of them had wanted to say out loud. "The other mechanics." Ethan looked at her. 11 years of counterfeit parts. 11 years of maintenance cycles. Her voice had gone thin. "You can't run that scheme without mechanics. Somebody signs off on those parts. Somebody certifies those jets. So either Voss had mechanics in on it taking a cut, or he had mechanics who found out. Who found what you found. Who pulled apart and asked a question." She swallowed. "What happened to them, Ethan? 11 years. Where are all the mechanics who came before you and found the same thing you just found?" The kitchen was very quiet. Ethan stood up. He walked to the window. He looked out at the dying afternoon light. "Pull the maintenance records," he said. "Every mechanic who worked Ashcroft Aircraft in the last 11 years. I want names, and I want to know what happened to them." Lena was already typing. It took her 2 hours. Ethan made dinner he didn't eat. And when she finally turned the laptop around, her hand was trembling. "There were 6, she said. 6 lead mechanics before you over 11 years. I found all 6. She pointed at the screen name by name. This one signed off on everything, no questions, worked for Ashcroft, 9 years, retired rich. He was in on it. Had to be. This one, she pointed, worked 8 months, then quit, suddenly moved to Arizona, never worked in aviation again. This one filed a discrepancy report about a serial number mismatch. Her voice caught, filed it, and then 2 weeks later resigned and signed a settlement agreement. There's a non-disclosure. I can see the filing but not the contents. He got paid to go away and shut up. And the others? Lena's face had gone white. 2 of them I can't find at all. They just stop. No forwarding address, no new job, nothing. And the last one? She stopped. Lena, the last one who found something. Who filed a report like you did. She looked up at him, and her eyes were wet. There was an accident. Ethan, small plane. Off the books, personal aircraft went down in bad weather. Ruled pilot error. No investigation. 8 years ago. She turned the laptop back around, unable to keep looking at the screen. His name was in the maintenance logs, and then it was in an obituary, and there was nothing in between. The silence in the kitchen was total. Ethan stood there for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and steady and colder than Lena had ever heard it. "So that's what he does," Ethan said. "When a mechanic finds the parts, he pays them off if he can. He runs them out of the business if he has to." He paused. "And once, at least once, he did worse." "You don't know that. It could be a coincidence. It could really have been an accident." "It could be." Ethan turned from the window. "But you don't feel like it's a coincidence, do you? Or you wouldn't have gone white reading it." Lena didn't answer. She didn't have to. Ethan crossed the kitchen and sat down across from her. He put his hands flat on the table over the invoices and the serials and the altered contract and the list of 6 mechanics, 2 vanished and 1 dead. "I want you to listen to me," he said, "because everything just changed. This morning, I thought we were dealing with a thief, a man who skims money and covers his tracks with lawyers. That's bad, but it's a kind of bad I understand. You expose a thief, he goes to jail, it's over." He took a breath. "But a man who might have put a plane in the ground to keep a secret, that's a different animal. That man doesn't have a line he won't cross. He's already crossed it. And if he crossed it 8 years ago for a secret worth a few million, what's he going to do tomorrow for a merger worth— how much is this merger worth, Lena? Lena's voice was barely audible. $2.3 billion. Ethan let that number sit in the room. $2.3 billion, he said. That's what closes at noon tomorrow. That's what's standing on top of a jet with a counterfeit part in it and no signature to bless the flight. And the only two things standing in the way of that number are a broke old mechanic and a 34-year-old with a laptop. He looked at her, and something in his face softened just for a second. You should go home, Lena. You should take everything you found, put it somewhere safe, and step out of this. This isn't your fight. You've got a whole life ahead of you. I'm 58 with a bad back and nothing to lose. Let it be me. For a long moment, Lena didn't say anything. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over his. My dad was a mechanic, she said quietly. Did I ever tell you that small regional carrier up north? He used to say the same thing you say. That the signature's the last honest thing in the whole business. That everybody else is looking at the money and the schedule and the deal, and the mechanic's the only one still looking at whether the plane's actually safe. Her eyes filled. He died when I was 19. Heart attack in a hangar on a Sunday doing a job nobody was paying him overtime for. And I got into this work because I wanted to be the kind of person he was. The kind who's still looking at the plane when everybody else has stopped. She squeezed his hand. So don't you tell me this isn't my fight, Ethan Carter. This is the only fight I've ever cared about. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, and then slowly he nodded. Okay, he said. Then we do it together. But we do it smart. And we do it tonight before Voss figures out how much we know. Because the second he realizes we've traced Vanguard back to Suite 300. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. At 8:40 that night, they were in Lena's car in the parking lot of a diner half a mile from Blackridge Airfield, going over the plan one last time when Ethan's phone rang. Unknown number. He looked at Lena. She looked at him. He answered. Carter. There was a pause on the line, and then a voice he didn't recognize. A woman's voice controlled precise the voice of someone used to being obeyed. Mr. Carter, my name is Vivian Ashcroft. I believe you've been working on one of my aircraft. Ethan's whole body went still. He put the phone on speaker, held it up so Lena could hear, and pressed a finger to his lips. Ms. Ashcroft, he said carefully. This is unexpected. I imagine it is. A pause. I'll be direct, Mr. Carter, because I don't have time to be anything else. I have a merger closing tomorrow at noon that requires a specific aircraft, and that aircraft is grounded. My operations director tells me it's grounded because you abandoned the restoration and refused to certify it out of a billing dispute. He tells me you're difficult, that you padded your invoice, and that you left an open safety item on the logbook out of spite to sabotage the flight. Another pause. 2 of my pilots refused to fly the aircraft because of that item. So before I decide whether to sue you into the ground, I wanted to hear you say it yourself. Did you leave a false safety note on my aircraft to get back at us for not paying you? Ethan closed his eyes. Here it was. The moment. Everything Lena had warned him about. Vivian Ashcroft, primed by weeks of Voss's poison calling, not to listen, but to confirm the story she'd already been sold. One wrong word, and he was the bitter mechanic. One angry outburst, and he handed her the villain she was expecting. He opened his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and level and absolutely certain. No, Ms. Ashcroft, he said. I didn't leave a false note. I left a true one. There's a flight control component in that aircraft with a serial number that doesn't exist in any manufacturer database on Earth. It was billed to your company for $260,000 by a supplier called Vanguard Aero Supply. And Vanguard Aero Supply traces back through 3 shell companies to a registered agent whose office is in Suite 300 at your own airfield. He paused. Suite 300 is Miles Voss's office, Ms. Ashcroft. The man who's been telling you I'm the problem sold you a counterfeit part and pocketed $250,000. And that part is installed in exactly the place where, if it fails, your pilots won't be able to save the plane. That's why they won't fly it. Not because of me. Because they can read a logbook and they know a rattlesnake when they see one. The line went utterly silent for 5 seconds. 10. Ethan and Lena stared at each other in the dark car, neither of them breathing. And then Vivian Ashcroft said in a voice that had changed completely, lower, harder, stripped of all its certainty, "Say that supplier's name again." Vanguard Aero Supply. Another silence. But this one was different. This was the silence of a woman doing math in her head, very, very fast. The silence of someone hearing a name she'd seen before on invoices she'd signed without reading, and realizing all at once what it might mean. "I've seen that name," Vivian said slowly. "On procurement reports. For years." A pause. "Miles told me they were a preferred vendor. Bulk pricing. Reliability. They're a shell Ms. Ashcroft. They're your own operations director selling you scrap parts at a markup and putting the difference in his pocket. And I can prove it. I've got the invoices. I've got the serial mismatches. And in about an hour, if you let me, I'm going to have the physical part in my hand pulled out of your jet with a fake serial number that matches the one on Voss's invoice." He leaned toward the phone. "But I need you to do one thing first. I need you to not fly that plane tomorrow, whatever the merger's worth. Because if that part fails at altitude, $2.3 billion isn't going to matter to the people who die." The silence stretched on so long that Ethan thought she might have hung up. Then Vivian Ashcroft said something that changed everything. "How do you know how much the merger is worth, Mr. Carter?" Ethan went cold. Because he'd just said it out loud, $2.3 billion, and he'd only learned that number 2 hours ago from Lena, from documents she'd pulled from places she wasn't supposed to be looking. It wasn't public. It wasn't something a mechanic should know. And in that instant, Ethan understood that he'd just done the exact thing Lena had warned him about. He'd given Vivian Ashcroft a reason to distrust him, a thread to pull away to turn everything he'd just said into the ravings of a man who knew far too much about a deal that was none of his business. "Ms. Ashcroft," he started. "Because that figure," Vivian said, and her voice had gone quiet and dangerous, "is known to exactly 9 people in the world. It is sealed. It is confidential. It has not been released to the press, to the staff, or to anyone below the board. And a contract mechanic in a diner parking lot should have no way of knowing it." A pause. "So I'm going to ask you very carefully, Mr. Carter. How does a man who claims to be exposing fraud happen to know the single most confidential number in this entire company?" Ethan looked at Lena. Lena had gone completely white, because she was the one who'd pulled that number. She'd pulled it along with everything else from the same place, in the same night. And if Vivian Ashcroft started asking how they'd gotten it, the whole thing came apart. Not because they were lying, but because everything they knew, all the proof, all the invoices, all the serials, had come from Lena, reaching into systems she had no right to reach into. Every piece of evidence they had was true, and every piece of it was tainted by how they'd gotten it. Voss hadn't just built a story that made Ethan the villain. He'd built a company where the only way to find the truth was to break the rules so that anyone who found it would be a criminal too. "Ms. Ashcroft," Ethan said slowly, choosing every word like a man crossing thin ice. "I'm going to tell you the truth. All of it. Including the part that makes me look bad. Because I think you're a person who'd rather have an ugly truth than a pretty lie. Or you wouldn't have called me yourself instead of sending your lawyers." He took a breath. "But before I do, I need you to understand one thing. Everything I'm about to tell you is going to give you a reason to hang up this phone and call the police on me instead of on Miles Voss. And I'm going to tell you anyway. Because there are people getting on that plane tomorrow, and I'd rather go to jail for how I found the truth than stay free knowing I let them fly." The line was silent. And then Vivian Ashcroft, CEO of a $2.3 billion company, said the 4 words that told Ethan Carter he might just have a chance. "I'm listening, Mr. Carter." Ethan looked at Lena one more time. She nodded. Go tell her all of it, even though telling it meant putting her own name, her own career, her own freedom on the table right beside his. He put the phone closer to his mouth. "There's a woman who works with me," Ethan began. "Her name is Lena Brooks, And last night I asked her to do something I had no right to ask. And across town in Suite 300 Miles, Voss sat at his desk, staring at his phone at a call log that showed Vivian Ashcroft had just spent 11 minutes on a line to a number he didn't recognize. 11 minutes he couldn't account for, with someone he couldn't identify the night before the biggest deal of his life. He didn't know who she'd been talking to, but he had a terrible cold feeling that he was about to find out. He picked up his own phone, dialed the number he'd sworn he'd never call again. And when the voice answered, Miles Voss said the words that would set the last worst part of this whole thing into motion. "It's gone past the mechanic now," he said. "Ashcroft's asking questions. I need you to handle it tonight, before that plane's supposed to fly." A pause. "I don't care how. Just make sure that by morning there's nobody left who can prove where those parts came from." Ethan told her everything. He sat in that dark car with Lena beside him, and the phone pressed to his ear, and he laid it all out for Vivian Ashcroft, the way you'd confess to a priest holding nothing back, including the parts that could put him and Lena both in a cell by morning. He told her how he'd asked Lena to trace Vanguard, how she'd pulled filings and manifests and invoices from places she had no authorization to touch, how the $2.3 billion figure had come up in the same hall buried in a procurement forecast she'd never meant to open. He told her that every piece of proof they had was real, and every piece of it was gathered in a way that wouldn't survive a courtroom. And when he was done, he waited. "So let me make sure I understand," Vivian said finally. Her voice had gone flat and careful, the voice of a woman deciding whether to trust the only person telling her the truth. "You're telling me that you have evidence my operations director has defrauded my company for 11 years. And you're also telling me that evidence was obtained by an unauthorized intrusion into my systems by your assistant. Which means if I act on it, I'm acting on stolen data, and any lawyer Miles hires tears it apart in an afternoon." "Yes," Ethan said. "That's exactly what I'm telling you." "Then why?" Vivian said slowly. "Would you tell me the one thing guaranteed to make your evidence worthless? Because you asked me a question, and I wasn't going to lie to you." Ethan's voice was steady. "You want to know if you can trust me, Ms. Ashcroft? This is how you know. A liar would have made up a story about where that number came from. I told you the truth, even though it cuts my own throat. That's the only proof I've got that I'm on the level. Everything else, like you said, a lawyer can tear apart. But a man who tells you the truth when a lie would serve him better, that's worth something. Or it used to be." There was a long silence on the line. 10 seconds. Ethan counted them. Beside him, Lena had stopped breathing entirely, her hands knotted in her lap. "It's 8:52, Vivian said abruptly. "The aircraft is scheduled to depart at noon tomorrow. That gives us 15 hours. I need 3 things from you, Mr. Carter, and I need them fast." Ethan's heart kicked. "You believe me. I believe you enough to not hang up. That's not the same thing. Here's what I need." Her voice sharpened into something executive, something used to running a crisis. 1. I need the physical part. The counterfeit servo pulled from the aircraft with the serial documented on camera chain of custody, clean from this moment forward. If it comes out of that jet with me watching, it's not stolen data. It's a physical component in my own aircraft that I have every right to inspect. That washes the taint. Do you understand what I'm saying? Ethan's mind raced to keep up. "You're saying if you authorize the inspection, it's legal. I'm the CEO. I can order an inspection of my own aircraft anytime I want for any reason. If you pull that part under my authorization with me or my counsel present, then it doesn't matter how you first learned to look for it. The part speaks for itself. The invoice speaks for itself. And your assistant's late-night adventures never have to come up in court, because I'll have found the fraud through a legitimate inspection I ordered as CEO. A pause. "That's how we save the evidence, Mr. Carter. We refined it clean tonight." Ethan looked at Lena. Some of the color had come back to her face. She was nodding slowly, and he could see her brain working, could see her recognizing that Vivian Ashcroft had just found the one path through the minefield that neither of them had been able to see. "That's smart," Lena said loud enough for the phone to pick up. "Who's that?" That's Lena Brooks, Ms. Ashcroft, Ethan said. The one I told you about. She's on speaker. She's been in this since the beginning. Ms. Brooks. Vivian's voice didn't warm exactly, but something in it acknowledged her. You broke about 9 laws pulling that data. Yes, ma'am. Why? Lena hesitated. Then, because I found a part with a fake serial number in an aircraft that flies people, and I couldn't figure out how it got there without looking where I wasn't supposed to. And once I saw the first thread, I couldn't stop pulling it. Because pulling it was the only way to know if people were going to die. Another silence. My father was in aviation, Vivian said unexpectedly. Long time ago, before all this. A pause, and when she spoke again, the executive edge had slipped just for a second, showing something underneath. He used to say the whole industry runs on one thing, not engineering, not money. Trust. The passenger trusts the pilot trusts the mechanic trusts the part, and the whole thing holds together as long as nobody breaks the chain. Her voice hardened again. Miles broke the chain, and I signed the invoices that paid for it because I trusted him. So this is mine to fix. Here's the second thing I need. Go. I need you to not go onto that tarmac tonight the way you were planning to. Ethan stiffened. How did you? Because I've read your file, Mr. Carter. The one Miles built to make you look bad. Ironically, it tells me exactly who you are. A man who left his certification card on a table rather than sign something he didn't believe in. A man like that doesn't sit at home and wait. A man like that is sitting in a car near my airfield right now. Isn't he working out how to get to that part before the deal closes? A pause. You have your badge. You were going to use the shift change at 10. Tell me I'm wrong. Ethan didn't answer. I'm not wrong, Vivian said. So listen to me carefully. Do not do that. Because if you go over that fence tonight without my authorization, everything falls apart. You become exactly the disgruntled saboteur Miles has been describing. You get arrested, the part gets lost in the confusion. And by the time anyone sorts out the truth, the plane's flown and the deal's closed, and Miles has shredded every document. You go in as a trespasser, and you hand him the ending he's been writing for weeks. Her voice dropped. But you go in with me, with the CEO of the company, physically present, authorizing the inspection, and there is nothing he can do. Nothing. He can't touch you. He can't stop you. He can't spin it. That's the difference between a break-in and an audit, Mr. Carter. And it's the whole ballgame. Ethan sat back in the seat. He looked at Lena. He was quiet for a long moment. You want to come to the airfield? He said slowly. Tonight. I'm 40 minutes out. I turned my car around while you were talking. What's the third thing you didn't ask about the third thing? What's the third thing? The third thing, Vivian said, is that I need to know whether Miles knows how close you are. Because if he doesn't, we have time. And if he does, she paused. If he does, then the two of us sitting on the phone congratulating ourselves on a clean chain of custody are being very stupid, because a man who's stolen this much for this long isn't going to let a part he can't explain sit in an aircraft overnight where anyone can pull it. The car went silent, and in that silence, Ethan felt something cold move through him, because he'd been so focused on how to get the part on the chain of custody, on the legal thread through the needle, that he'd stopped thinking about the one thing that mattered most. Miles Voss had 11 years of practice making problems disappear. And a part he couldn't explain was the biggest problem of all. Ms. Ashcroft, Ethan said slowly. Get to the airfield as fast as you can. Why? What is it? Because you just made me realize something. He was already reaching for the door handle, already turning to Lena, his heart starting to pound. If Voss is as smart as we think he is, that part isn't going to be in the plane when we get there. He's going to pull it himself. Tonight. Because a counterfeit servo in his hand is a problem he can throw in a furnace. But a counterfeit servo in an aircraft under CEO inspection is a problem that puts him in prison. He looked at Lena, and she was already starting the car. He doesn't need to stop us from finding the part. He just needs to get it out of the jet before we do. And once it's gone, once it's melted down, or dropped in a lake, we've got nothing. Invoices he can call clerical errors. Serials he can call typos. But the physical part is the one thing he can't argue with. And it's the one thing he can make vanish. How long do we have? Vivian's voice had gone urgent. I don't know. If he's already moving, maybe none. Ethan's mind was racing now fast, cold clear. He called me at 9 last night begging for my signature. That means, as of last night, his plan was still to fly the plane with the part inside and my name on top of it. But if something's changed today, if he's realized we're on to Vanguard... He stopped. Because he remembered. The email. The altered contract. The lawyers. That had come in at 4 this afternoon. Which meant that sometime today, Voss had shifted from trying to buy Ethan's signature to trying to bury Ethan in liability. And a man only stops trying to buy you when he's decided he doesn't need your signature anymore. He's changed his plan, Ethan said, and his voice had gone very quiet. Today, sometime today, Voss stopped trying to get me to sign and started building a case to blame me instead. Which means he's given up on flying the plane with the part inside. Which means he's going to pull it. Lena finished pulling out of the parking lot, fast tires chirping. Tonight. He's going to pull the part, destroy it, fly a clean plane tomorrow, and blame the delay on you. God, Ethan, he might be doing it right now. Ms. Ashcroft, Ethan said into the phone, gripping the door handle as the car swung onto the road. How fast can you get to that hangar? I'm pushing 90, 25 minutes. Push 100. The line clicked off. It was 9:04 p.m. Lena drove like she was trying to outrun the truth of what they'd just realized. The half-mile to Black Ridge Airfield took 90 seconds, and the whole way Ethan sat rigid in the passenger seat, running the math, feeling the window they'd had shrinking to nothing. Talk to me, Lena said, hands white on the wheel. What's the play? We can't go over the fence anymore, Vivian said. Vivian said don't go in as a trespasser. Ethan was already thinking 3 moves ahead. But there's a difference between going onto the tarmac and going into the maintenance office. My badge is still active. I'm still technically the contractor of record until they process the paperwork to remove me, which they haven't, because Voss never filed it. I have every legal right to be in that building tonight. To do what? To watch, Ethan pointed. Pull in there. The lot by the admin building, not the hangar. If Voss is pulling that part, he's not doing it himself. He doesn't know which end of a wrench to hold. He's got somebody doing it, and whoever's doing it has to sign it out, log the removal, or at least badge into the hangar. There's a record. There's always a record. And if we can catch him in the act of pulling apart, he has no legitimate reason to remove the night before a flight. Then it doesn't matter if the part disappears, Lena breathed. Because we've got him removing it. We've got him removing a certified flight control component from an aircraft that's scheduled to fly in 15 hours with no work order, no authorization, and no replacement. There's no innocent explanation for that. None. You don't pull a servo the night before a flight unless you're hiding something. Ethan's jaw was set. The part is the best evidence, but Voss pulling the part in the dead of night is almost as good, because an innocent man doesn't do that. Lena swung the car into the admin lot and killed the lights. They sat in the dark, engine ticking, and looked across 200 yards of open ground at the maintenance hangar, where a light was on. That hangar should be dark, Ethan said softly. Night crew doesn't come on till 10, and they work the small stuff in the East Bay. That's the West Bay. That's where the Gulf Stream is. Somebody's in there. Somebody's in there, the night before a flight in a bay that should be empty with the lights on. Ethan reached for the door handle. Stay in the car. Ethan. Stay in the car, Lena. If this goes wrong, I need one of us free. One of us who can call Vivian, call the FAA, get the proof out. That's you. You're the one with the data. I'm just the old man who knows which part to look at. He met her eyes in the dark. Keep the engine running. If you see me come out fast, or if you see anybody who isn't me, you drive. You don't wait. You drive straight to Vivian and you give her everything. Promise me. Lena's jaw trembled. I don't like this. I don't either. Promise me. I promise. Ethan got out of the car. It was 9:07 p.m. He crossed the lot at a normal pace, not hurrying a man with a badge who belonged there. He'd learned a long time ago that the way you get caught somewhere is by acting like you shouldn't be there. So he walked like he owned the place, badge out, and when he reached the side door of the admin building, he swiped it, and the light went green and he was inside. The building connected to the hangar through a corridor and a set of double doors. Ethan knew this building. He'd spent 6 weeks in it. He knew that the maintenance office had a window that looked out over the West Bay, and he knew that if he stood in the dark office and looked through that window, he could see whoever was standing next to the Gulfstream without being seen himself. He moved down the corridor quiet as he could. His back ached. His heart was going hard. 58 years old and sneaking through a building in the dark like a burglar, except he wasn't the one stealing. He was the one trying to stop a theft. He reached the maintenance office. The door was ajar. He slipped inside into the dark and crossed to the window. And there in the bright light of the West Bay, standing next to the open access panel of the Gulfstream 550, with a tool cart beside him and a flight control servo already half removed from its mount, was a man Ethan had never seen before, not a mechanic. Ethan could tell in a glance. The man held the tools wrong. He was working slow, awkward reading from a printed diagram taped to the fuselage. Somebody had told this man exactly which part to pull and how, and the man was following instructions he didn't understand. Which meant Voss hadn't sent a mechanic. He'd sent someone else. Someone whose job wasn't to fix airplanes. Ethan's blood ran cold as he remembered the phone call he hadn't heard Voss in Suite 300, telling a voice on the other end to handle it tonight to make sure by morning there was nobody left who could prove where the parts came from. The man at the aircraft wasn't there to fix a problem. He was there to erase one. And Ethan Carter was standing 40 feet away in the dark, the only witness with no weapon, a bad back, and a promise to a woman in a car that she wouldn't come in after him. It was 9:11 p.m. Ethan pulled out his phone, set it to silent, and with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be, he raised it to the window and began to film. The man worked for another 2 minutes, grunting, fumbling, finally freeing the servo from its mount. He held it up to the light, checked it against the diagram, and Ethan zoomed in as far as the phone would go and caught at the part, the serial plate, the fake number that matched Voss's invoice. He got it. On video, time-stamped. The counterfeit component coming out of the aircraft in the hands of a man who had no business touching it. Then the man did something that made Ethan's stomach drop. He didn't set the part on the tool cart. He didn't bag it for inspection. He wrapped it in a rag, shoved it into a duffel bag at his feet, and then he reached into the same bag and pulled out a replacement servo, a different part, a legitimate-looking one, and started fitting it into the empty mount. He was swapping it. Right now. Pulling the counterfeit part that could send Voss to prison and dropping in a clean, real, properly serialized component in its place. So that when Vivian Ashcroft ordered her clean inspection tomorrow, the part they pulled would check out perfectly. The evidence wouldn't just be gone. It would be replaced with proof of Voss's innocence. By morning, the aircraft would be flawless, and Ethan Carter would be a liar who cried counterfeit over a part that turned out to be genuine. No. Ethan breathed. No, no, no. He had it on video, but video could be questioned. Video could be called doctored, staged a disgruntled contractor's fabrication. The physical part, the actual counterfeit servo going into that duffel bag right now, was the one thing that couldn't be argued with, and it was 30 seconds from disappearing forever. Ethan looked at the man, bigger than him, younger than him, a man sent to a hangar at night to erase a problem who had presumably been told that if a problem showed up in person, he should erase that too. Ethan was 58. His back was bad. He had a daughter 11 days from a tuition payment. And the only thing standing between that duffel bag and a furnace was him. He put the phone in his pocket, still recording. He took a breath. And Ethan Carter, aircraft technician, single father, the man who'd left his certification card on a table rather than sign a lie, stepped out of the dark office and walked into the light of the West Bay. "That's not your part," Ethan said. The man spun around, the replacement servo in one hand, the duffel bag at his feet. "That's a certified flight control servo, and you just pulled it out of an aircraft with no work order." Ethan said, walking toward him, steady and slow, his voice carrying across the bay. And the one in your bag has a serial number that doesn't exist. I know because I'm the one who found it. I'm the contractor of record on this aircraft, and you're standing in my hangar stealing evidence. The man's face went through several things at once, surprise calculation, and then something flat and cold that Ethan recognized from 31 years of reading Trouble. You're the mechanic, the man said. It wasn't a question. I'm the mechanic. You should have taken the money. People keep telling me that. The man set down the replacement servo. Slowly. And he took a step toward Ethan, and there was nothing in his eyes at all, and Ethan understood with total clarity that Vivian had been right about everything that Voss had crossed the last line 8 years ago, and was about to cross it again, and that the reason he'd sent this particular man was that this man knew how to make an old mechanic have an accident. Here's what's going to happen, the man said, taking another step. You're going to give me your phone. And then you and me are going to have a conversation about how you're not going to be a problem anymore. Ethan didn't back up. Son, he said quietly, I've had cancer scares. I've buried a wife. I've watched good men die because somebody upstream decided a schedule mattered more than a signature. You think you're the scariest thing that's happened to me? He held his ground. I already sent the video, 30 seconds after I started filming it uploaded, to 3 places. To my assistant who's in a car outside, to a CEO who's 15 minutes from this hangar, and to a cloud server that 100 lawyers couldn't scrub in a year. He tilted his head. You can take my phone. Doesn't matter. The part in your bag is already famous. And the woman who owns this airfield is on her way here right now to see it come out of your duffel. The man stopped. Ethan saw it, the flicker of doubt, the recalculation. Because a man sent to make a quiet problem disappear does not want to be standing over the problem when the CEO walks in. You're bluffing, the man said. Maybe? Ethan's voice was steady. You want to bet your freedom on it? Because here's the thing about men like Voss. They send men like you to do the ugly part, and then when it goes wrong, and this is going wrong, they are gone. They are on a plane. They are anywhere but standing next to you when the police arrive. You're the one holding the counterfeit part. You're the one on camera pulling it. Voss is home in bed with an alibi. You really think he's going to prison for you? Ethan took a step closer, lowering his voice. Put the bag down, son. Walk out. The only person who saves you now is you, and the only way you do it is by not adding your name to a list you do not want to be on. For a long, terrible moment, the man didn't move. And then, far away but getting closer, they both heard it, the sound of tires on the airfield access road moving fast. Headlights swept across the hangar's high windows. The man's head snapped toward the sound. That'll be her, Ethan said quietly. You've got about 90 seconds to decide who you are. It was 9:19 p.m. The man looked at the duffel bag, looked at Ethan, looked at the headlights growing in the windows. And Ethan watched the calculation happen in real time, watched a man who erased problems for a living arrive at the one problem he couldn't erase himself on camera, holding the evidence with the CEO of the company pulling up outside. He dropped the replacement servo, he grabbed the duffel bag, and he ran not toward Ethan, but toward the far end of the bay, toward the personnel door on the opposite side, moving fast, taking the counterfeit part with him. No. Ethan lunged after him, but his back seized a white bolt of pain, and he stumbled against the tool cart. And by the time he'd caught himself, the man was at the door, was through. It was gone into the dark with the one piece of physical evidence that couldn't be argued with. Ethan hit the personnel door 10 seconds behind him and slammed it open and stared out into the dark tarmac and saw nothing. The man was gone, swallowed by the night and the maze of parked aircraft and the fuel trucks and the dark. The part was gone. Ethan stood in the open door chest, heaving back screaming, and for one crushing moment he felt the whole thing collapse. The physical evidence, the one thing Voss couldn't spin, vanishing into the dark in a duffel bag. All of it for nothing. Behind him, tires shrieked to a stop outside the hangar. A car door slammed. Fast footsteps. Mr. Carter. A woman's voice, sharp, urgent, coming through the building. Ethan Carter, Where are you? Ethan turned from the empty doorway. Vivian Ashcroft came through the double doors from the admin corridor at something close to a run. A woman in her 50s in an expensive coat thrown over whatever she'd been wearing when she turned her car around, her face tight with adrenaline. And right behind her, breathless, was Lena, who had clearly abandoned the car the second Vivian arrived, both of them converging on the lit hangar. He got away, Ethan said, and his voice cracked with it. There was a man. Voss sent a man. He pulled the part, the real one, the counterfeit, and he swapped in a clean one, and he ran, and I couldn't, my back, he's gone, Vivian. He took the part. The physical part is gone. Vivian stopped. Her face fell. But Lena didn't stop. Lena ran straight past both of them to the aircraft, to the open access panel, to the replacement servo lying on the ground where the man had dropped it, and she crouched over it, and Ethan saw her go still. Ethan. Her voice was strange. Ethan, come here. Lena, it doesn't matter, the clean part's just going to check out. Come here. Ethan limped over. Vivian right behind him. And Lena pointed at the replacement servo lying on the hangar floor at its serial plate gleaming under the bright lights. He panicked, Lena said slowly. He heard the car, he grabbed the counterfeit part and he ran, but he never installed the clean one. He dropped it. It's right here. She looked up, her eyes wide. And Ethan, look at the serial. Ethan crouched, ignoring the fire in his back. He looked at the serial number on the replacement part. And he started very slowly to smile. Vivian, he said quietly, look at this number. Write it down. He looked up at her. Because this is the part Voss was going to swap in to make everything look clean. This is his cover part. And a man like Voss doesn't buy his cover parts retail at full price with a paper trail. He buys them the same way he buys everything. He tapped the serial plate. Through Vanguard. This clean-looking part came from the same fraudulent supplier as the dirty one. It's got a serial too. And I'd bet everything I own, which admittedly isn't much, that when Lena runs this number it traces right back to Suite 300, same as all the rest. Lena was already typing on her phone, cross-referencing the serial against the manifest data she'd pulled the night before. He didn't get away clean, Ethan said, standing, his voice growing stronger. He took one piece of evidence, and he left another one lying on the floor. Because he was scared, and scared men make mistakes. He handed us a part that traces straight back to Voss, and he did it while I was filming, and he did it 40 feet from the woman who signs Voss's paychecks. He turned to Vivian. The counterfeit's gone, but we don't need it anymore. We've got a part on video being pulled with no work order. We've got a man fleeing the scene. We've got a replacement component that traces to the same shell company, and we've got you, the CEO, standing in this hangar as a witness to all of it. That's not stolen data anymore, Vivian. That's an inspection you're conducting right now with your own eyes. Vivian Ashcroft stared at the servo on the floor. She stared at the open access panel. She stared at Ethan Carter, this 58-year-old mechanic with a bad back who'd walked into a dark hangar alone to stop a man from erasing the truth. Ms. Ashcroft, Lena said, looking up from her phone, her voice shaking. The serial on the replacement part. I ran it. It's registered to Vanguard Aero Supply. Purchase order dated 3 days ago. Billed to Ashcroft Aviation for $190,000. She swallowed. He bought a spare counterfeit part 3 days ago, which means he's been planning to swap it out since before Ethan even walked off the job. This was always the plan. Get the signature if he could, and if he couldn't pull the part swap in a clean-looking fake and fly the plane anyway. The hangar went silent, and Vivian Ashcroft's face changed. Whatever doubt had been left in her, whatever part of her, had still been holding on to the possibility that Miles Voss was the loyal operations director she'd trusted for years. It died right there on the floor of the West Bay, next to a counterfeit servo with a fake serial number. 3 days ago, she said quietly. 3 days ago, Lena confirmed. He's been planning to put a plane in the air tomorrow with a counterfeit flight control part in it, and blame Ethan if it failed. Vivian's voice had gone very cold and very level. He was going to let people fly, board members, clients, my own people, on a part he knew was fake, to close a deal. Yes, Ethan said quietly. For a long moment, Vivian Ashcroft didn't say anything. She just stood there in the bright light, and Ethan watched something shift in her. Watched the CEO who ran a $2.3 billion company arrive at a decision that was going to cost her that deal, and possibly her company, and definitely her comfortable belief that she'd known who she could trust. Then she took out her phone. "Who are you calling?" Lena asked. "3 people." Vivian's voice was steel now. "First, my head of security to lock down this airfield and every aircraft on it. Nobody flies, nothing moves, not one wheel turns, until every part on every jet has been inspected by someone I trust." She was already dialing. "Second, my general counsel to start documenting everything in this hangar right now tonight under my authorization as CEO, so that when Miles Voss's lawyers try to call it stolen data, I can tell them I found it myself during an inspection of my own aircraft." She paused. "And third," her jaw tightened, "the FAA. Because a counterfeit flight control part in one aircraft means I have to assume there are more. And if there are more, then every plane in my fleet is a coffin waiting for a bad day, and I am not going to be the woman who knew and stayed quiet." Ethan looked at her. "You'll lose the merger." "The merger's already lost," Vivian said flatly. "The second I ground the fleet, the deal collapses. $2.3 billion gone by morning." She met his eyes. "But you know what, Mr. Carter? My father was right. This whole industry runs on trust. And a company that flies counterfeit parts to close a deal isn't a company worth saving. So yes, I'll lose the merger. I'll probably lose a lot more than that before this is over." She raised the phone to her ear. "But I'm not going to lose the one thing you refuse to sell. Not tonight." And then into the phone. "This is Vivian Ashcroft. I need you to ground the entire fleet. Effective immediately. Every aircraft. Yes, I'm aware what tomorrow is. Do it anyway." It was 9:31 p.m. While Vivian made her calls, pacing the length of the hangar. Her voice hard and fast. Ethan lowered himself onto a work stool and pressed a hand to his back and let out a long breath. Lena came and sat beside him, and for a moment neither of them said anything. The adrenaline was draining out of both of them, leaving behind that shaky, hollowed-out feeling that comes after you've been more scared than you let yourself feel. "You went in alone," Lena said finally quietly. "You told me to stay in the car, and you went in alone against a man who, Ethan, that man was sent to hurt you. Maybe worse. You knew that, and you walked into that light anyway." "Somebody had to." "That's not an answer." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "When I was young," he said, "maybe 30, I worked a job where the lead signed off on a repair he shouldn't have. Rushed it. Schedule pressure. I knew it wasn't right, and I didn't say anything because I was new, and he was the boss, and I needed the work." He stared at the floor. "That plane didn't crash. Got lucky. But I found out later how close it came, and I promised myself I'd never again stay quiet in the car because it was safer. Every time since then that it's mattered, I've made myself get out of the car." He looked at her. Tonight it mattered. Lena's eyes were wet. She didn't say anything. She just reached over and squeezed his arm. Across the hangar, Vivian ended a call, then immediately started another. Ethan could hear pieces of it. The FAA. Now a duty officer somewhere. Vivian's voice steady and precise as she used words like suspected counterfeit flight critical component, and immediate fleet grounding, and request for emergency inspection. Words that once spoken to a federal aviation authority could not be unspoken. Words that turned a private fraud into a public reckoning. She was burning it all down, on the strength of one servo on a hangar floor and one old mechanic's word. "She believed you," Lena said softly. "In the end, she actually believed you." "She believed the part," Ethan said. "I just held the flashlight." Vivian ended the FAA call. She stood for a moment with her back to them, her shoulders rising and falling. And then she turned around, and her face had aged 5 years in 20 minutes, and she walked over to where Ethan sat. "It's done," she said. "Fleet's grounded. Security's locking down the field. My counsel is on his way with a documentation team. And the FAA is sending inspectors first thing in the morning." She let out a breath. By noon tomorrow, instead of a merger, I'm going to have a federal investigation and a company in free fall and a board that's going to want my head. A pause. And I'd do it again. All of it. Because the alternative was flying that plane. She looked at Ethan for a long moment. I owe you an apology, Mr. Carter. You don't? I do. I read a file that called you difficult and expensive and slow, and I believed it because it was easier than believing my own operations director was a criminal. I let Miles Voss make you the villain in my head for weeks, and you— Her voice caught just slightly. You sat in a car outside my airfield tonight, and you walked into a dark hangar alone to protect people you've never met. Passengers, crew, strangers, people who'll never know your name. She swallowed. So yes, I owe you an apology. And I owe you $412,000, which you'll have by morning, along with a great deal more, because I'm told that's the number on the invoice they refuse to pay. Ethan shook his head slowly. I didn't do it for the money. I know you didn't, Vivian said. That's exactly why you're getting it. For a moment, the three of them sat in the strange quiet of the grounded hangar, the enormity of what had just happened settling over them. A fraud 11 years deep. A fleet full of counterfeit parts. A deal worth billions dead by morning. And an operations director who somewhere out there in the night was about to learn that everything had come apart. Which was when Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked at it and went cold. It's Voss, he said. Vivian's head snapped up. Answer it. Speaker. Say nothing about me being here. Ethan answered. Put it on speaker. Carter? Ethan. Voss's voice was smooth warm, the voice of a man who did not yet know his world had ended. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I think we got off on the wrong foot. I'd like to make things right. The full $412 plus a $100,000 bonus, plus a long-term maintenance contract. All you have to do is come by tomorrow morning, sign the certification, and we put this whole ugly business behind us. A pause. The plane just needs your signature, Ethan. That's all. One signature and everybody's happy. Ethan looked at Vivian. Vivian looked back at him, and she gave him a single small nod. Go ahead. Miles, Ethan said slowly. The part's already out of the plane. Silence on the line. Your man pulled it an hour ago, Ethan continued. The counterfeit servo. The one Vanguard sold you for $260,000. He pulled it and he ran when the CEO's car pulled up. But he dropped the replacement Miles. The clean-looking fake you bought 3 days ago to swap in. He left it on the hangar floor, and it traces right back to Vanguard, right back to Suite 300, right back to you. The silence stretched so long that Ethan thought Voss had hung up. Then, very quietly, Miles Voss said, You're lying. Am I? Ethan let a beat pass. Ask the woman standing next to me. And Vivian Ashcroft leaned toward the phone, and in a voice colder than anything Ethan had heard all night, she said, Hello, Miles, it's Vivian. I'm standing in the West Bay looking at a counterfeit flight control servo on the floor of my hangar with a serial number that traces to a shell company registered out of your office. The fleet is grounded, my counsel is on his way, and the FAA will be here in the morning. A pause. So I'd like you to explain to me right now why my operations director sent a man to pull a part out of an aircraft I was scheduled to fly board members on tomorrow. And I'd think very carefully about your answer because it may be the last thing you say before the lawyers take over. There was no sound on the line at all. And then softly, a click. Miles Voss had hung up. Vivian straightened slowly. She looked at the phone in Ethan's hand, then at the dark windows of the hangar out toward the airfield and the parked jets and the whole grounded fleet. He's running, she said quietly. He knows it's over, and he's running. She turned to Lena. Ms. Brooks, that data you pulled, all of it. The invoices, the serials, the shell company filings. I need it. Not for me, for the FAA, for my counsel, for the record. It was obtained improperly, and it may never see the inside of a courtroom, but it's a map. It tells my investigators exactly where to look, so they can find it all again, clean the right way. She paused. Can you do that? Lena nodded. It's already backed up. 3 places. I'll give you everything. Good. Vivian looked back at Ethan. Then here's where we are, Mr. Carter. As of this moment, Miles Voss is finished whether he runs or not. The fraud is exposed, the fleet is grounded, and tomorrow, instead of the worst mistake of my career, I'm going to make the hardest right decision of it. She took a breath. But it's not over. Because a man like Voss doesn't build an 11-year fraud alone. There's a supplier. There's whoever's manufacturing these counterfeit parts. There's whoever Voss just called to send that man to my hangar tonight. And there's the little matter of 6 mechanics who came before you. Her eyes flicked to Lena, who had clearly briefed her at some point in the chaos. 2 of whom vanished, and 1 of whom died in a plane that was ruled pilot error. The hangar went very still. You know about that, Ethan said quietly. Ms. Brooks told me while you were inside. Vivian's jaw tightened. And if it's true, if Miles Voss put a mechanic in the ground 8 years ago to protect this, then grounding a fleet and calling the FAA isn't the end of anything. It's the beginning. She looked at both of them, this woman who'd just torched $2 billion without blinking. The fraud I can prove, the parts I can prove, but a man died. And if I'm right about who killed him and why, then the most dangerous part of this whole thing isn't behind us. She looked toward those dark windows, out toward wherever Miles Voss was right now, running into the night with everything falling down around him. It's still out there, Vivian said, and now it knows we're coming. It was 9:48 p.m. The fleet was grounded, the merger was dead. And somewhere beyond the reach of the hangar lights, the man who'd built it all was making the phone calls of a desperate man. The kind of calls that had made problems disappear before, and might again if the 3 people standing in that hangar weren't careful about what came next. They didn't sleep that night. None of them. By 10 o'clock, the airfield had turned into something else entirely. Vivian's head of security, a former state trooper named Dawes, arrived with 4 men and locked the gates, and every aircraft on the field went dark and still under his orders. Vivian's general counsel, a silver-haired man named Prescott, who clearly hadn't expected to spend his night in a hangar, showed up with 2 paralegals and a camera, and began photographing everything. The open access panel, the counterfeit replacement servo on the floor, the tool cart, the diagram still taped to the fuselage, documenting each item under Vivian's authorization, building the clean chain of custody that would make it all admissible. And through it all, Ethan Carter sat on a work stool with a bag of hangar ice pressed to his lower back, watching the machinery of consequence finally after 11 years begin to turn. You should see a doctor about that back, Vivian said, coming to stand beside him around 11. I've been telling my back that for a decade. It doesn't listen. She almost smiled. Then the smile faded. Prescott's been on the phone with the FAA for an hour. They're sending a team at 7. 2 inspectors and a criminal investigator from their enforcement division. She paused. The word criminal is doing a lot of work in that sentence. Once they use it, this stops being mine to control. It becomes federal. That's good, Ethan said. That's what you want. Is it? Vivian looked out over the dark field. You know what I keep thinking about? I keep thinking about all the invoices I signed. 11 years of them. Vanguard Aero Supply over and over, and I never once looked closer because Miles handled procurement, and Miles was good, and I trusted Miles. Her voice tightened. How many flights, Ethan? How many times did one of my planes go up with a part like that inside it and land safe, and I patted myself on the back for running a tight operation? How many times did we get lucky? You can't do that to yourself. Why not? It's true. Because you didn't know. Ethan shifted the ice, wincing. The whole scheme only works because a good person trusts the wrong one. That's not your failure. That's his crime. He used your trust as a tool. Feeling guilty about being trusting is like feeling guilty for getting robbed because you left your door unlocked in a town where you thought you had good neighbors. He looked at her. The guilt belongs to the man who picked the lock, not the one who trusted the neighborhood. Vivian was quiet for a moment. My father would have liked you, she said finally. Across the hangar, Lena had set up at a workbench with her laptop and was working fast, pulling together everything she'd found into a single organized package for Prescott, and eventually the FAA. Every invoice, every serial mismatch, every shell company filing, the whole 11-year map. She'd been at it for 2 hours, and Ethan could see the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders, but she didn't stop. At 11:40, she stopped. "Ethan?" Her voice cut across the hangar. "Vivian, come here. Both of you. Now." Something in her tone brought them both fast. Ethan set down the ice and limped over Vivian right behind him. Lena was staring at her screen, her face pale in the glow. "I was cross-referencing the shell companies," she said. "Vanguard traces to a registered agent, right? And that agent handles 4 companies, one of which leases Suite 300. We knew that. But I wanted to know who was actually behind it, who owns the ownership. So I kept digging, and I found a holding company sitting on top of all 4, registered offshore. And that holding company has a single managing member listed in one filing from 9 years ago before it got scrubbed." She looked up. "It's not Miles Voss." Ethan went still. "What?" "Voss's office leases the suite. Voss signs the purchase orders. Voss looks like the whole thing." Lena turned the laptop toward them. "But he doesn't own it. The man who owns Vanguard, the man who's been taking the biggest cut of this for 11 years, is somebody else. Somebody whose name is on a holding company that controls the whole pipeline. And Voss is just the guy inside the company making it run. He's not the boss of this. He's an employee of it." The hangar felt suddenly colder. "Who?" Vivian said. "Who's the name?" Lena hesitated. "That's the thing. The name got scrubbed everywhere except one filing, and even there it's partial. But there's an initial and a last name." She looked at Vivian, and something in her face made Ethan's stomach drop before she even said it. "The last name is Ashcroft." Silence. Total, absolute silence. Vivian Ashcroft stood very still. "That's not possible." "There's an initial," Lena said quietly. "R.R. Ashcroft." And Ethan watched something happen to Vivian's face that he would remember for the rest of his life. He watched the blood drain out of it. He watched her eyes go wide and then flat. He watched a woman who had just calmly torched $2 billion come completely undone by 2 letters and a name. "Vivian," Ethan said carefully. "Who's R. Ashcroft?" For a long moment she didn't answer. When she did, her voice was barely a whisper. "Richard," she said. "Richard Ashcroft, my brother." It was 11:47 p.m. The story came out of her slowly in pieces as she sank onto a work stool and stared at nothing. Richard Ashcroft, older brother. The 2 of them had inherited the company together when their father died 15 years ago. Richard was supposed to run it. He was the natural heir, the charming one, the one their father had groomed. But Richard had problems gambling mostly, and other things Vivian only half knew about, and within 2 years he'd nearly run the company into the ground. So the board had pushed him out and put Vivian in charge, and Richard had taken a settlement and a seat on the board and a promise that he'd stay out of operations. That was 13 years ago. "He was so angry," Vivian said softly. "When they chose me. He said I'd stolen it from him, that it was supposed to be his. He barely spoke to me for years." She swallowed. "And then maybe 11 years ago he came around, started being kind again, told me he was proud of what I'd built, started showing up to board meetings, being helpful, recommending vendors." Her voice broke. "He's the one who recommended Miles Voss for operations director, 11 years ago. He said Miles was sharp, reliable, that I could trust him with the whole maintenance side." Ethan felt the whole shape of it click into place, cold and terrible. "He put Voss in," Ethan said quietly. "Your brother recommended Voss, and then together they built Vanguard, and for 11 years they've been skimming millions out of the company you run, while your brother sat on your board, smiling at you across the table." "He recommended the man," Vivian whispered. "He built the pipeline. And he's been sitting in my boardroom for 11 years, pretending to be proud of me while he robbed me blind and put counterfeit parts in my planes." Her hands were shaking. "It was never about the money for Richard. It was never just the money. It was—" She stopped, and Ethan saw her understand it fully for the first time. It was revenge. He couldn't have the company, so he decided to poison it from the inside, to turn my own trust into the thing that destroyed me. If those planes had ever gone down, if that fraud had ever come out with my signature on the invoices, it would have been me who lost everything. Me the board blamed. Me the world blamed. And Richard would have been right there, the wronged brother, ready to step back in and take what he always thought was his. Lena's voice was very quiet. The mechanics. The ones who found things. The one who died. Vivian's head came up. Voss might send a man to a hangar to pull apart, Lena said. But a company board member with a gambling problem and 13 years of resentment. Vivian, if a mechanic 8 years ago got close to exposing this, who had more to lose? The operations director skimming a salary's worth on the side. Or the brother whose entire revenge, whose entire second shot at the company, depended on this never coming out. The hangar was silent, except for the hum of the lights. "You're saying my brother killed a man," Vivian said. It wasn't quite a question. "I'm saying," Lena said carefully, "that we found 6 mechanics, and the one who died was the one who filed a discrepancy report 2 months before a plane he'd never worked on went down with him. In it ruled pilot error. No investigation. And I'm saying that if the person protecting this secret was just Miles Voss, an employee, then maybe that really was an accident. But if the person protecting it was Richard Ashcroft, a man who'd already decided the company was worth more to him destroyed than shared." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Vivian Ashcroft stood up, and when she spoke, her voice had changed again. Not the cold executive steel from before, but something deeper, something that came from a place that had just had 13 years of a relationship rewritten in the span of 10 minutes. "Prescott," she called across the hangar. "Change of plan. I need you to add someone to the FAA briefing. And I need you to call our contacts at the Bureau, not just the FAA, because this isn't just aviation fraud anymore." She took a breath. "This may be a homicide." Prescott stared at her. "Vivian, who—" "My brother," she said flatly. "Richard. He owns Vanguard. He's owned it the whole time. Voss works for him." She turned to look at the dark windows out toward the night. "And I want to know where he is right now, because Miles Voss ran an hour ago when he realized it was over. And if Voss ran to anyone, if Voss made a phone call to the man who's been protecting this for 11 years, then my brother already knows the fleet is grounded. He already knows the FAA is coming. And he already knows that there are 3 people standing in this hangar who can connect his name to all of it." It was 12:03 a.m. Prescott was already dialing. Dawes, the security chief, had moved to the hangar door, one hand near his hip, scanning the dark field. And Ethan felt the temperature of the whole night change, because up until now, the enemy had been a fraud, a scheme, a paper trail. Now the enemy had a face and a name and a 13-year grudge. And if Lena was right, at least one body already behind him. "Vivian," Ethan said quietly. "We need to get Lena somewhere safe. She's the one who found it. She's the one holding the data. If Richard's cleaning up—" "I'm not going anywhere," Lena said immediately. "Lena, I said I'm not going anywhere." Her jaw was set, but her hands were still shaking. "Every time it gets dangerous, you try to send me away. In the car. Now this. And I keep telling you, this is the only fight I've ever cared about. My dad—" Her voice cracked. "One of those 6 mechanics could have been my dad, Ethan. A guy in a hangar on a Sunday doing an honest job while somebody upstairs decided his life was worth less than a quarterly number. I'm not running. I'm finishing it." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. And then he nodded, because he understood, because it was the same reason he'd walked into the light of the West Bay a few hours ago. "Then we finish it together," he said. "All of us, smart, careful, and not alone." He turned to Vivian. "Get everyone in one place. Well lit. Witnesses. Cameras. The one thing men like your brother can't operate in is the open. Everything they do in the dark, quietly off the books. So we don't give them dark. We give them daylight. We put every piece of this in front of the FAA and the Bureau and Prescott's cameras, And we do it so publicly, so thoroughly, that there's no quiet corner left for anybody to make a problem disappear. Vivian nodded slowly. The open, yes. And that was when Prescott lowered his phone, his face grave. Vivian, he said, I reached our bureau contact. He's taking it seriously. Agents will be here at 7 with the FAA team. He hesitated. But there's something you need to know. I had my assistant check Richard's whereabouts quietly through the board's travel office. A pause. Richard chartered a private aircraft 2 hours ago. Out of a private field 40 miles north, filed a flight plan to a country with no extradition treaty. The hangar went dead silent. He's running, Vivian breathed. He already knows. Voss called him and he's running. The flight's scheduled to depart at 6 a.m., Prescott said. Before the FAA arrives, before anyone can question him. If he takes off Vivian, he's gone. Offshore accounts, no extradition, and every piece of evidence we have points at Voss and Vanguard. But the man who owns it all, the man who may have killed a mechanic to protect it, walks onto a plane at 6 a.m. and disappears forever. It was 12:17 a.m. Vivian Ashcroft stood in the middle of the hangar, and Ethan watched her do the math, the same cold, fast math she'd done on the phone hours ago. 6 a.m. departure, 40 miles north. FAA arrives at 7. The one man they needed, the one who owned the whole thing, gone with an hour to spare. We can't stop a private charter, Prescott said. Not without cause a judge will sign off on, and we don't have time to get a warrant before 6. Everything Lena found is inadmissible. The clean evidence, the part on the floor, the video points at Voss, not Richard. We can prove Richard owns Vanguard on paper, but a paper ownership of a supplier isn't a crime. A judge grounds a flight over at 1 in the morning. So he just leaves? Lena said, her voice rising. He built all of it. He maybe killed someone, and he just gets on a plane and flies away because we can't get a piece of paper signed fast enough. And Ethan, who had been quiet, who had been thinking, who had spent 31 years solving problems that other people said couldn't be solved, said slowly, he's flying a private aircraft. Everyone looked at him. Out of a private field at 6 a.m. in a hurry to leave the country before anyone can stop him. Ethan stood up, ignoring his back, something kindling in his eyes. Tell me, Prescott, that charter, whose aircraft is it? Does Richard own a plane, or is he chartering? Prescott checked his notes. Chartered, through a broker. It's he squinted, a Gulfstream, managed by a charter outfit that operates out of that private field. Ethan went very still. A Gulfstream, he said softly. Managed by a charter company. He looked at Vivian. Vivian, how many charter companies operate Gulfstreams out of small private fields in this region? Not many. It's a small world up there, and a charter operator running a fleet of business jets needs parts, servos, avionics, hydraulics, and they buy them wherever they can get them cheap and fast and off the books. He let it land. Vivian, what are the odds? What are the actual odds that the charter company your brother is flying out on tomorrow morning has been buying its parts from the exact same counterfeit pipeline he built? The silence that followed was different from all the silences before it, because everyone in that hangar understood all at once the terrible, perfect shape of what Ethan was suggesting. You're saying, Lena said slowly, that Richard might be about to fly out of the country on a plane that's full of the same counterfeit parts he's been selling for 11 years. I'm saying it's possible, Ethan said. I'm saying that a man who's been flooding this region's aviation market with fake parts for over a decade has almost certainly infected more than just Ashcroft's fleet. Voss sold to Ashcroft because Ashcroft was the mark. But Vanguard's a supplier. Suppliers sell to everybody. And a small charter operation running Gulfstreams on thin margins is exactly the kind of outfit that buys cheap parts from a supplier that offers a good price and asks no questions. He turned to Lena. Can you check? Can you find out if that charter company ever bought from Vanguard? Lena was already typing faster than Ethan had ever seen her move. Give me the name, Prescott, the charter company's name now. Prescott read it off. Lena typed. The hangar held its breath. 30 seconds passed, a minute, And then Lena went absolutely white. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Oh my God, Ethan, they bought from Vanguard. 8 purchase orders over 4 years. The last one," she scrolled. "The last one was 6 months ago. Flight control components. For a Gulfstream. Tail number." She read it out. Prescott checked his notes. His face went gray. "That's the tail number," Prescott said quietly. "That's the aircraft Richard chartered. That's the plane he's flying out on at 6 a.m. Nobody spoke. "He's going to get on a plane," Vivian said slowly, the horror dawning across her face, "that has his own counterfeit parts in it." "Not just any parts," Ethan said, and his voice had gone very quiet. "Flight control components. Bought 6 months ago. From Vanguard. The same pipeline, the same fakes installed in the same place I found the one in your jet." He looked at Vivian. "The place where if it fails, the pilot can't save the plane." The full weight of it settled over the hangar. Richard Ashcroft. The man who'd spent 11 years poisoning his sister's fleet with counterfeit parts out of revenge. The man who may have murdered a mechanic to protect the secret. The man now fleeing the country to escape justice was about to board an aircraft carrying the exact same counterfeit death that he himself had put into the world. He'd built the trap, and he was about to walk into it unknowing at 6 a.m. "We have to stop him," Vivian said. Ethan looked at her surprised. "Vivian?" "We have to stop him, Ethan." She was already moving, already reaching for her phone. "I don't care what he did. I don't care about the fraud or the revenge or even—" Her voice caught. "Even if he killed that mechanic. He's my brother. And I am not going to stand in this hangar and let him climb into a plane that's going to fall out of the sky because of a part he put in the world. I am not going to let him die that way. Not even him. Not even now." And there it was. The thing that separated Vivian Ashcroft from her brother laid bare in a single choice. Richard had spent 11 years deciding that people's lives were worth less than his revenge. And Vivian given the chance to simply let the man who'd betrayed her fly to his own death and solve all her problems in one clean stroke, chose instead to try to save him. "That's why they picked you," Ethan said quietly. She looked at him. "What?" "The board. 13 years ago. They picked you over him." Ethan's voice was gentle. "This is why. Right here. This exact moment. Because when it came down to it, when it would have been so easy to just let him fall, you're trying to catch him instead. That's the difference between the two of you. It always was." Vivian's eyes filled. For just a second. Then she blinked it back because there was no time, because it was 12:31 a.m. and a plane was leaving at 6. "How do we stop it?" she said. "Prescott, how do we ground a charter flight 40 miles away in 5.5 hours? Prescott spread his hands helplessly. "We can't. Not legally. Not in time. We can't prove the parts are counterfeit without pulling and inspecting them, and we can't pull them without access to an aircraft we don't own, operated by a company that has no reason to cooperate in the middle of the night." "Then we don't do it legally," Ethan said. Everyone turned to him. "We do it the way it should be done, the way it's supposed to be done." Ethan straightened, and for the first time all night, something like calm came over him. The calm of a man who has finally found the one thing he knows how to do better than anyone in the room. You don't need a warrant to ground an aircraft you have safety concerns about. You need a mechanic. He looked at Vivian. "I'm a certified aircraft technician. Or I was until I left my card on a table 2 days ago. But here's the thing about that card, it's not the paper that matters. It's the knowledge. And I know right now tonight that there is a Gulfstream 40 miles north with a counterfeit flight control component installed in a location where failure is catastrophic. I know it because I found the same part from the same supplier in the same place in your jet. That's not a theory. That's a professional safety determination made by a qualified technician. But you don't have access to that aircraft," Prescott said. "You can't just—" "I don't need access to pull the part," Ethan said. "I need to make one phone call. To the one person who does have the authority to ground that flight instantly, no warrant, no judge, no waiting till 7 a.m. He looked around the hangar. "The FAA has emergency authority. If a qualified technician reports a specific credible life-threatening airworthiness defect on a specific aircraft identified by tail number, the FAA can issue an emergency order grounding that aircraft tonight. They don't need to prove it first. They ground it, then they inspect. Safety first. That's the whole point of the system. He turned to Prescott. You've got an FAA contact. You woke him up an hour ago. Call him back. Put me on the phone. Let me make the report technician to authority the way it's supposed to work, and I will personally give them a sworn safety determination on that tail number that will keep that plane on the ground until it's been inspected bolt by bolt. Prescott stared at him. You'd put your name on that, your professional determination. If you're wrong, if that part checks out clean. I'm not wrong, Ethan said simply. But even if there were a chance I was, yeah, I'd put my name on it, because that's what the name is for. He almost smiled. Miles Voss offered me $400,000 to put my name on a lie, and I wouldn't do it, so you can be damn sure I'll put my name on the truth for free. The hangar was silent, and then Vivian Ashcroft smiled a real smile, exhausted and grieving and fierce all at once, and she said, Prescott, get the FAA back on the phone, right now. It was 12:44 a.m. The call took 20 minutes. Ethan stood in the center of the hangar with the phone to his ear and gave the FAA duty officer his name, his certification number, the tail number of the aircraft, and a clear, precise professional account of exactly what he'd found in Ashcroft's Gulfstream and why he had a credible specific safety concern, that the same defect existed in the charter aircraft scheduled to depart at 6 a.m. He spoke the language of the trade, the language of a man who'd spent 31 years earning the right to be believed, and Ethan watched the tone on the other end of the line shift from sleepy skepticism to sharp attention to finally action. When he hung up, he stood very still for a moment. Well, Lena said. Emergency Airworthiness Directive, Ethan said quietly. Effective immediately. That aircraft is grounded pending inspection. They're notifying the charter operator and the field's operations tonight. That plane doesn't move until an FAA inspector has personally examined the flight control components. He let out a long breath. It's done. He's not flying out at 6. He's not flying out at all. The relief in the hangar was physical, a loosening of something that had been wound tight for hours. Vivian pressed a hand to her mouth. Lena sat down hard on a stool. Even Prescott, unflappable Prescott, closed his eyes for a moment. And Ethan thought that was the end of it. He really did. The fleet grounded. The charter grounded. The FAA coming at 7. Richard trapped in the country, his escape plane frozen on a tarmac 40 miles away. The whole thing wrapped up safe in the light the way he'd wanted it. He was wrong, because at 1:09 a.m., Dawes, the security chief who'd been standing silent watch at the hangar door for 3 hours, suddenly straightened one hand, going to his hip. Ms. Ashcroft, he said sharply. Vehicle, coming up the access road, fast, no lights. Everyone froze. The gate's locked, Vivian said. Nobody should be able to. Somebody's got a code, Dawes said grimly, moving toward the door. An employee code. Somebody who works here. He drew something from his hip. Everybody get back, behind the aircraft, now. Ethan felt it before he understood it, the cold certainty of what was coming. Because there was only one person who'd been part of this company, who had a gate code, who had every reason in the world to come to this hangar tonight, fast in the dark, with no lights. It's Voss, Ethan breathed. He didn't run, or he ran and came back. Why would he come here? Lena whispered. And Ethan understood all at once with sickening clarity. Because the part's still here. He pointed at the counterfeit replacement servo, still sitting on the hangar floor, where the fleeing man had dropped it hours ago, photographed, but not yet removed, waiting for the FAA. The clean-looking fake that traces to Vanguard. It's the one piece of physical evidence that connects the pipeline to Richard sitting right here in the open. Voss knows we have it. And if Richard's going down for murder, if this is now big enough to bury both of them, then Voss's last play is to get that part back. To take the one physical thing that ties it all together and make it disappear. So it's just Lena's inadmissible data and my word against theirs. Headlights swept the hangar windows, then went dark as the vehicle killed its lights and rolled the final stretch in blackness. "Behind the aircraft," Dawes ordered again. "All of you, move." But Ethan didn't move toward the aircraft. He moved toward the part. "Ethan." Lena's voice sharp with fear. "He's not getting it," Ethan said, crossing the hangar fast, despite his back bending to scoop up the counterfeit servo. "This is the whole thing, Lena. This is what makes it real. He is not walking out of here with it." The personnel door at the far end of the bay banged open, and Miles Voss walked in. He looked nothing like the smooth, confident man from the conference room 2 days ago. His shirt was untucked, his hair wild, his eyes wide and bright and desperate in a way that made every person in that hangar go very still. He'd been running for 4 hours. He'd made phone calls. He'd learned that his boss, his partner, the man he'd served for 11 years, had chartered a plane and tried to flee the country without him, leaving Miles Voss to take the fall for everything, including maybe a murder 8 years old. And now he stood in the doorway of the West Bay, and in his shaking hand was a gun. "Nobody move," Voss said, his voice cracked. "Nobody, just everybody stay where you are." It was 1:11 a.m. "Miles," Vivian's voice from somewhere behind the aircraft, steady and calm. "Miles, put that down. Whatever this is, it's not that. Not you. Don't." Voss's hand shook. The gun swung toward her voice, then back toward Ethan, who stood frozen in the middle of the hangar with the counterfeit servo in his hands. "Don't you talk to me like you know me. You have no idea what he made me, what I—" His voice broke. 11 years. 11 years, I did what Richard told me, and tonight he gets on a plane and leaves me here to take all of it. The fraud, the parts, and— He stopped. "And the mechanic," Ethan said quietly. Voss's eyes snapped to him. 8 years ago," Ethan said, holding very still. Holding the man's gaze, the servo still in his hands. "The mechanic who found the parts, who filed the report, who died in a plane-ruled pilot error." He kept his voice low level, the voice you use with a spooked animal. "That was you, wasn't it? Miles, not Richard. Richard doesn't get his hands dirty. Richard makes the calls and sends other people to do the ugly part, like he sent a man here tonight to pull that servo. But 8 years ago, the man he sent—" Ethan's voice went even quieter. "The man he sent was you." The gun trembled violently in Voss's hand. "I didn't—" His voice cracked into something raw. "It wasn't supposed to— Richard said just talk to him, just scare him, make him understand. And I—" Tears were running down his face now, and the gun was shaking so hard, Ethan was more afraid of it going off by accident than on purpose. "I didn't mean for the plane, I only meant to—" He couldn't finish. 11 years I've carried that. 11 years. And tonight, he leaves me. He leaves me to answer for it." And Ethan Carter, standing in the middle of a hangar, with a gun pointed at his chest, and a counterfeit part in his hands, understood that the most dangerous moment of the entire night had arrived. Not because Miles Voss was a killer, but because he was a broken man who'd finally been abandoned by the person he'd sold his soul to. And broken, abandoned men with guns were the least predictable things in all the world. "Miles," Ethan said gently, "look at me, just me. Not the part, not Vivian, not any of it. Just me." He waited until Voss's wild eyes settled on his face. "You know what I've got in my hands right now. A little piece of metal, that's all. A servo. And you drove back here through a locked gate with a gun to get it because you think if it disappears, you disappear with it. Clean. Free." He shook his head slowly. "But it doesn't work like that, son. It never did. Because the part was never the thing that was going to catch you. You were. The second you told me just now in front of 5 witnesses what happened 8 years ago, the part stopped mattering. You can take it. Melt it down. It changes nothing. Because the truth already left the building. It's already out. And no gun in the world can put it back." Voss stared at him. You can't fix 11 years with a bullet, Miles, Ethan said softly. You can only add one more thing you'll carry. And I don't think you can carry one more thing. I don't think there's room. The hangar was so silent, Ethan could hear the man breathing ragged, wet, desperate. Put it down, Ethan said. Not because you're caught, because you're tired. Because you've been tired for 11 years, and this is where it stops. One way or another, Miles, this is where it stops. And you get to choose how. For a long, terrible moment, Miles Voss stood in the doorway with the gun shaking in his hand, and 11 years of rot and guilt and abandonment pouring down his face. And then somewhere far off in the night, faint at first, and then unmistakable, came the sound of sirens. Prescott's bureau contact. The FAA. Someone. Help finally arriving. Voss heard it too. His head turned toward the sound, and Ethan watched the last of the fight go out of him. Watched the desperate energy that had carried him back through that gate simply drain away, leaving behind nothing but a hollow, exhausted man who had run out of road. He really left me, Voss said, to no one, to himself. After everything, he just left. Yeah, Ethan said quietly. He did. That's who he always was, Miles. You just couldn't see it until it was you standing on the tarmac watching his plane taxi away. He took one slow step forward. But here's the thing. That plane's not going anywhere either. We grounded it an hour ago. Your Richard's not in another country tonight. He's sitting on a runway 40 miles north, with the FAA on the way, in a plane full of the same fake parts he's been selling for 11 years. Another slow step. Neither of you is getting away. But only one of you tried to send a man to his death tonight, and it wasn't you. So put the gun down, Miles. Let the sirens come. And for the first time in 11 years, stop carrying his weight. The sirens grew louder. Miles Voss looked at the gun in his hand as though he'd forgotten it was there, and slowly, he lowered it. His arm dropped to his side. The gun hung from his fingers, then slipped, then clattered to the hangar floor. And Miles Voss sank down after it, down onto his knees on the concrete, and put his face in his hands, and wept the deep, broken weeping of a man who had finally, after 11 years, set down a weight that had been killing him slower than any plane crash ever could. Dawes crossed the hangar in 3 strides and kicked the gun away, and had Voss's hands behind his back before the man even seemed to notice. Ethan stood where he was, the counterfeit servo still cradled in his hands, his heart hammering his back, a sheet of white fire he'd stopped feeling somewhere in the last 5 minutes. Lena came out from behind the aircraft at a run and threw her arms around him, and he felt her shaking, and he realized he was shaking too. "You crazy old man," she whispered into his shoulder. "You walk toward the gun. You walk toward it." "Somebody had to," Ethan said. Same as before, same as always. Vivian came out more slowly. She looked at Miles Voss on his knees on the concrete, weeping, being read his rights by Dawes, as the first red and blue lights began to strobe through the hangar windows. She looked at the man who'd served her brother for 11 years, who'd poisoned her fleet, who'd killed a mechanic, and nearly killed Ethan, and who was in the end just another person Richard Ashcroft had used up and thrown away. "He was a person once," she said quietly. "Before Richard got to him. I actually think he was a decent man once." "Maybe," Ethan said. "A lot of people are decent right up until somebody offers them a reason not to be. The test isn't whether you're decent when it's easy. It's whether you hold on to it when someone hands you $400,000 and a good excuse." He looked at Voss, and there was no hatred in it, only something closer to sorrow. He failed the test, 11 years ago and every day since. That's the whole tragedy of him. It was 1:24 a.m. The hangar filled with people. Then federal agents, local police, the flashing lights, the radios, the machinery of law finally catching up to 11 years of rot. Prescott moved among them with his documentation. Dawes handed off Voss to a pair of agents. Lena gave her name and haltingly began the long process of explaining what she'd found and how. And through it all, Ethan Carter stood quietly to the side. The counterfeit servo finally handed off to an evidence tech in a clear plastic bag, and watched the truth do the one thing that all of Richard Ashcroft's money and all of Miles Voss's desperation had spent 11 years trying to prevent. He watched it come into the light, One of the agents, a woman with tired eyes and a federal badge, came over to him with a notepad. "You're the technician, Carter. You made the airworthiness report on the charter aircraft." "That's me." "That report's going to save some lives," she said. "That charter was booked solid for the next 2 weeks after tonight's flight. Corporate clients, families, the works. If those parts are what you say they are, and the inspector's already on his way to that field, you didn't just stop one man from fleeing the country. You stopped a plane full of people from going down some Tuesday. Nobody would have ever connected to any of this." She looked at him. "How'd you know to make the report? To push it that hard at 1 in the morning? Ethan thought about it for a moment. 31 years ago, he said. "I signed a card that says I'm the one who checks, and I've spent every day since then trying to be worth that signature." He looked out at the flashing lights, at the grounded fleet, at the whole long night finally breaking toward dawn. "That's all this ever was, ma'am. A man trying to be worth his own signature." The agent looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote something in her notepad and nodded and moved on. And far to the north, on a dark runway at a private field, a chartered Gulfstream sat frozen in place under an emergency FAA order. Its engines cold, its flight plan canceled, its counterfeit heart still and unbeaten. And inside the small terminal beside it, a man named Richard Ashcroft sat with his packed bags and his offshore accounts and his 13 years of revenge watching through the window as the federal vehicles pulled through the gate and came at last for him. He had built the trap over 11 years. And in the end, he was the one still standing in it when the lights came on. Dawn came gray and cold over Black Ridge Airfield, and by the time the sun cleared the tree line, the whole world had changed. Richard Ashcroft was arrested at 6:52 that morning, sitting in the small terminal beside a plane that would never fly him anywhere. He didn't run, he didn't fight. Vivian would learn later that when the agents walked in, her brother simply stood up, straightened his jacket, the way their father used to, and said, "Took you long enough." As if he'd been waiting 13 years for this exact moment. As if some part of him had always known it would end on a runway with the sun coming up and his sister nowhere in sight. The FAA inspector reached the charter Gulfstream at 7:20 and pulled the flight control servo 40 minutes later. It was a counterfeit. Same fake serial, same dead-end trace, same catastrophic failure point Ethan had found in Ashcroft's jet. The inspector held it up in the morning light and went pale, because he understood exactly what it meant, that if Ethan Carter hadn't made a phone call at 1:45 in the morning, Richard Ashcroft would have taken off at 6, and there was a real chance that plane would not have made it to wherever he was running. Richard Ashcroft had nearly become the final victim of his own 11-year crime. Ethan didn't feel triumphant when he heard. He felt tired and sad, and something else he couldn't quite name. Because a man had built a machine to destroy his sister, and that machine had very nearly swallowed him whole, and there was no version of that story that felt like winning. There was only the quiet, exhausted relief of a plane that stayed on the ground. He didn't sleep until noon. When he finally did, he slept for 14 hours, and when he woke, the world had already begun sorting itself out. The merger was dead. It collapsed exactly as Vivian had known it would the instant she grounded the fleet. $2.3 billion gone by morning, the acquiring company pulling out the moment they learned an entire aviation fleet was under federal investigation for counterfeit parts. The financial press went insane. Ashcroft Aviation stock cratered. Analysts predicted the company wouldn't survive the year, and Vivian Ashcroft stood in front of her board 3 days later and told them the truth, all of it. The fraud, her brother, Voss, the mechanic who'd died 8 years ago, the counterfeit parts flying in her fleet. She held nothing back, and she took no shelter, and when a board member asked her why she hadn't quietly settled it, hushed it up, protected the deal and the company and herself, she said 7 words that would end up quoted in every article written about the whole affair. Because a plane doesn't care about quarterly earnings. They almost fired her anyway. The vote was close. But in the end, enough of them remembered why they'd chosen her over Richard 13 years ago, remembered that they'd bet the company on the sibling who'd protect it rather than the one who'd loot it, and they kept her. Barely. with a mandate to rebuild or go down trying. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the night in the hangar, when Vivian Ashcroft called Ethan Carter and asked him to come to her office. He almost said no. He'd been paid the full $412,000 had hit his account the morning after exactly as she'd promised, and a good deal more had followed as legal settlements from the frozen Vanguard accounts began to unwind. His truck was fixed. Grace's tuition was paid a semester ahead. For the first time in years, the bills on his kitchen table were things he could actually pay. He didn't need anything from Vivian Ashcroft, but he went anyway, because she asked, and because he'd learned over a long life that when someone who has just lost everything asks to see you, you go. Her office was smaller than he'd expected, and plainer, and the view out the window was of the airfield rather than the city. She stood when he came in, and she shook his hand, and Ethan saw that the 2 weeks had cost her. She'd aged. There were shadows under her eyes that hadn't been there in the hangar. But there was something else too, something steadier, like a woman who'd been through fire and found out she was made of something that didn't burn. "Mr. Carter," she said, "thank you for coming." "Ethan," he said, "I think after that night we can skip the mister." She smiled faintly. "Ethan? Then I'm Vivian." She gestured to a chair, and they sat, and for a moment neither of them said anything. Out the window, an FAA inspection team was crawling over one of the grounded jets, tiny figures against the gray metal. "They've found counterfeit parts in 9 aircraft so far," Vivian said quietly. 9. And they're not done. My whole fleet, Ethan. 11 years. Every plane I ever put someone on. Her voice was steady, but Ethan could hear what it cost her to keep it that way. "The FAA thinks we got lucky. That the failure points were rare enough, the flight hours low enough that none of them ever came due. But they also think," she paused, "they think it was only a matter of time. That if this had gone on another year, another 2 years, one of them would have failed. And people would have died, and everyone would have called it an accident, and Richard would have stepped in to save the company from my mismanagement. But it didn't happen," Ethan said. "That's the thing to hold on to. It didn't happen. It didn't happen because you left your card on a table." Vivian looked at him directly. "I've thought about that a great deal these 2 weeks. The whole thing, the fraud, my brother, all of it, it was going to come out eventually, one way or another. But the way it comes out matters. It could have come out as a smoking crater in a field somewhere with your name on the sign-off and Miles Voss's story about the difficult mechanic in every newspaper. Or it could come out the way it did in the light with a part in an evidence bag and a fleet safely on the ground." She leaned forward. "The difference between those two endings is one man who wouldn't sign his name to a lie for $400,000. That's the whole difference. That's everything." Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. "Richard's going to prison." Vivian went on, her voice going flat and careful, the way it did when she talked about her brother. "The fraud alone would do it, but with Miles cooperating, and he's cooperating fully now, telling them everything, 11 years of everything." She stopped. "They're reopening the mechanic's death, the one 8 years ago. Miles has told them what really happened, that Richard ordered him to frighten the man, and that it went further than frightening, and that they made it look like an accident." Her jaw tightened. "My brother is going to answer for a man's life, Ethan. Finally, after 8 years. There's a family somewhere that thought their father, their husband died in a stupid weather accident, and they're going to learn the truth. I don't know if that's a mercy or a cruelty, maybe both." "It's the truth," Ethan said quietly. "The truth is usually both." Vivian was silent for a moment. "His name was Daniel Reyes," she said. "The mechanic. I made them tell me. Daniel Reyes. He had 2 kids. He filed a discrepancy report about a serial number exactly like you did, and 2 months later, he was dead." She looked at Ethan, and her eyes were wet now, and she didn't try to hide it. "You did the same thing he did. You found the same thing he found. You filed the same kind of report. The only difference between you and Daniel Reyes is 8 years, and the fact that this time, when Richard sent his man to the hangar, you were still standing there when the CEO's car pulled up." Her voice broke. "You should have died in that hangar, Ethan. By every logic of how this has always gone, you should be the seventh name on that list, and you're not. You're sitting in my office, and I don't entirely know how to live with the fact that 6 people paid the price you almost paid, and I signed the invoices the whole time. And there it was, the thing that had been sitting under everything Vivian Ashcroft had done for 2 weeks. Not the lost merger, not the ruined company. The guilt. The unbearable weight of having trusted the wrong brother for 13 years while good men paid for it. Ethan leaned forward. "Vivian," he said, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to actually hear it, because I've watched what this is doing to you." He waited until she met his eyes. "You did not kill Daniel Reyes. Your brother did. You did not put counterfeit parts in those planes. Your brother did. You trusted people you had every reason to trust, and they used that trust as a weapon, and that is their sin, not yours. The whole scheme only worked because you're the kind of person who trusts her own brother and her own director. Being that kind of person isn't a crime. It's the thing that makes you worth working for." His voice was firm now, almost fierce. "And when the moment came when you finally saw it, you didn't hush it up to save yourself. You didn't take the easy road. You grounded a fleet, killed a $2 billion deal, turned in your own brother, and stood in front of your board and told them the truth when a lie would have saved your job. You tried to save Richard's life, even after everything he did. That's not a guilty person, Vivian. That's the opposite. That's what a good person does when they finally learn the truth." Vivian looked at him for a long moment, and something in her face eased just slightly, not healed, not forgiven, but eased the way a wound eases when someone finally cleans it out. "My father would have said the same thing," she said quietly. "Then your father was a smart man." She laughed wetly and wiped her eyes, and for a moment she was just a person instead of a CEO, just a woman who'd lost her brother and her company, and found out both had been lies. Then she straightened, and the executive came back, and she said, "I didn't ask you here to make me feel better, though I appreciate it more than I can say. I asked you here because I want to offer you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you say no." "I'm listening," Ethan said. The same words she'd said to him on the phone that first night. She caught it too, and smiled. "The company's a wreck," Vivian said. "You know that. The merger's dead. The stock's in the basement, half my fleet's grounded, and I've got a federal investigation crawling through everything I own. Most people think we won't survive." She folded her hands. "But I'm going to try. Because Daniel Reyes deserves a company that would never have let what happened to him happen. And the only way I rebuild this into something worth rebuilding is by making it the kind of place where the next Daniel Reyes, the next Ethan Carter, can file a report and not end up dead or run out of the business or paid to disappear." She leaned forward. "So I'm building something, an independent safety and audit system, completely separate from operations, separate from procurement, separate from me, reporting to an outside board, with real protection, real legal ironclad protection for any technician who flags a safety concern. A system where a mechanic's signature can't be bought, can't be overridden, and can't be punished." Ethan went still. "That's the thing I demanded," he said slowly. "In your office that first night, before I knew any of this. You asked what I wanted, and I said, you said independent audit, full transparency, and protection for technicians who report safety risks." Vivian nodded. "I remember. I wrote it down. I've had it on my desk for 2 weeks. She looked at him. "You asked for it before you knew there was an 11-year fraud. Before you knew about Daniel Reyes. Before you knew about my brother. You asked for it just because you're a mechanic, and you knew in your bones that a system where technicians can be silenced is a system that gets people killed. You were right about everything before you had a single piece of proof." She paused. "So I'm building it. And I want you to run it." Ethan sat back. "Vivian, before you say no," she said quickly, holding up a hand, "hear the whole thing. I don't want you to run a maintenance department. You'd hate that, and you'd be miserable behind a desk, and we both know it. I want you to be the person the system reports to, the final independent authority on airworthiness. The person whose signature is the last word, who answers to no one in operations, who can ground any aircraft in this fleet for any legitimate safety reason, and who cannot be fired, overruled, or bought for making that call. She looked at him. I want your signature to be the thing that keeps this company honest, because it already saved it once. The office was very quiet. Ethan looked out the window at the grounded jets, at the FAA team crawling over the gray metal, at the whole broken enterprise that Vivian Ashcroft was somehow determined to build back into something worth having. I'm 58 years old, he said finally. I've got a bad back. I turn a wrench and file reports and go home to my daughter. I'm not an executive, Vivian. I'm not a board meeting person. I don't own a suit that fits. I don't want an executive, Vivian said. I've had executives. One of them was my brother. She smiled faintly. I want a mechanic. I want the man who left his card on a table. I want the person who walked into a hangar toward a gun because somebody had to. That's not a job you hire an executive for. That's a job you can only give to someone who's already proven they'd rather be broke and honest than rich and quiet. She leaned forward. You already did the job, Ethan. That night in the hangar, you did exactly what I'm asking you to do. You stood between this company and a catastrophe, and you refused to move. I'm just asking you to keep doing it, with a title and a salary and the legal authority to make it stick. Ethan was quiet for a long time. He thought about Grace and the tuition that was paid now and the life that had suddenly gotten easier. He thought about his back and his age and the honest, simple work he'd done for 31 years. He thought about how tired he was, and then he thought about Daniel Reyes, a mechanic he'd never met who'd found the same thing he found, filed the same report he filed, and died for it 8 years ago, leaving behind 2 kids who'd been told it was an accident. He thought about the 4 other mechanics, the ones who'd vanished or been paid off or run out of the business. He thought about how close he'd come to being the 7th name on that list. And he thought about how many mechanics were out there right now in hangars all over the country who'd find something wrong someday and have to decide whether to say it, and how much it would matter to those people on that day to know that there was at least one place in the world where saying it wouldn't cost them everything. There's a condition, Ethan said finally. Vivian's eyes lit. Name it. Daniel Reyes's kids. Ethan's voice was quiet and steady. You said he had 2. Whatever this company owes them, and it owes them everything, I want it done right. Not a settlement to make them go away, not a check to buy their silence. I want them taken care of honestly for the rest of their lives, and I want somebody to sit down with them and tell them the truth about who their father was. That he wasn't a man who crashed a plane in bad weather. That he was a man who found something wrong and had the courage to say so, and that it cost him his life. And that 8 years later, that same courage saved a whole fleet of people because another mechanic followed his example. Ethan's voice thickened. I want them to know their father was a hero, because he was, and nobody ever told them. Vivian's eyes filled again. She didn't wipe them this time. Done, she said. All of it. Done. Then... Ethan let out a long breath. Then I'll think about it. You'll think about it. I'm 58, Vivian. I don't leap at things anymore. I'll think about it. Seriously. But I'll think about it. He almost smiled. Ask me again in a week. I'll ask you again in a week. Vivian agreed. And they both knew in the way you know these things what the answer was going to be. He took the job, of course. A week later, exactly as she'd predicted, he called her back and said yes on the conditions they'd agreed, and Vivian Ashcroft hired the mechanic who'd left his card on a table to be the man whose signature no one could ever buy again. Lena came with him. That was non-negotiable on his end. If he was going to run an independent safety system, he wanted the sharpest diagnostic mind he'd ever worked with running the investigations. And besides, he'd learned that Lena Brooks did not respond well to being left in the car. She built the audit division from the ground up, and within a year, it was the most respected safety operation in the regional aviation industry, and technicians from other companies started calling it quietly when they found something wrong at their own outfits and didn't know who they could trust. Because that was the thing that grew out of that night in the hangar. The thing that mattered more than the arrests or the trial or even the company's slow, stubborn survival. Word got around. Word got around that there was one place, where a mechanic could report a safety problem and not lose their job, their reputation, or their life. Where a signature still meant something. Where an old man who'd left his card on a table had built a system that made sure no one ever had to make the choice Daniel Reyes made alone 8 years too early. Miles Voss pleaded guilty to everything. In exchange for his full cooperation, he avoided the worst of it. But he'd spend a long time in prison, and Ethan found somewhat to his own surprise that he didn't hate the man. He pitied him. Voss had been a decent person once, Vivian had said before Richard got to him, and Ethan believed it. He believed that somewhere back at the beginning, there'd been a version of Miles Voss who might have made a different choice, and that the whole long tragedy of the man was that he'd said yes the first time when saying no was still easy, and every yes after that had only gotten harder to take back. It was a cautionary tale Ethan would think about for the rest of his life. The signature wasn't a single moment. It was every moment. You didn't stay honest by making one brave choice. You stayed honest by making the small ones over and over, especially when no one was watching, and the money was good, and the excuse was ready. Richard Ashcroft went to trial. He was convicted of fraud of conspiracy, and on the strength of Miles Voss's testimony and 8-year-old evidence, finally examined with fresh eyes of the death of Daniel Reyes. He would die in prison. Vivian visited him exactly once, and never spoke of what was said, and never went back. But Ethan noticed that after that visit, something in her finally settled the last of the guilt finally set down, and he understood that whatever passed between them, Vivian had finally stopped carrying her brother's weight the way Miles had carried it for 11 years. She'd looked the truth full in the face, and it had freed her. Daniel Reyes's children were taken care of, fully, honestly, permanently. And Ethan kept his other condition too. He drove out himself a few months later and sat down with them. A young man and a young woman, now grown, and he told them who their father was. He told them about the discrepancy report. He told them that their father had found something wrong in an airplane, and had the courage to write it down, knowing it might cost him, and that it did cost him, and that 8 years later, that same report and that same courage were the thing that showed another mechanic what to look for. He told them their father's honesty had saved lives he never knew about in planes. He never touched years after he was gone. The young woman cried. The young man didn't say much. But before Ethan left, the son shook his hand and held it a moment longer than a handshake needed, and said, "Thank you for telling us he wasn't careless. That's what they told us, that he was careless, that he made a mistake." His jaw worked. "You're telling me he did the opposite, that he did everything right and it killed him anyway." "He did everything right," Ethan said quietly. "And I promise you it didn't kill him for nothing, not anymore. Because of him there's a whole system now that makes sure it can't happen the same way again. Your father is the reason that system exists. Every mechanic who's protected by it, every plane that's grounded before it fails, every family that gets to keep their father, that's your dad. That's his legacy. He just had to wait 8 years to see it, and he had to leave it to the rest of us to build." Ethan squeezed the young man's hand. "But it's his. Never let anybody tell you different." It was a good day that day. One of the best of Ethan's life, though it was heavy too, the way the best days sometimes are. The Gulfstream 55. Oh, the jet that had started all of it, the one Ethan had rebuilt and refused to certify, was repaired properly at last. The counterfeit parts came out. Real ones went in, sourced, legitimately documented, completely inspected independently. And when it was finally ready, months later, Ethan Carter did the final inspection himself. Walked every inch of it, checked every serial, against every record. And then he sat down in the maintenance office, and for the first time in a long time, signed his name to a certification. He held the pen over the paper for a moment before he did it, thinking about the last time he'd been in a room like this with an invoice they wouldn't pay. Thinking about the card he'd left on the table. Thinking about Daniel Reyes and Miles Voss and Richard Ashcroft and Vivian and Lena and the whole long road from that conference room to this quiet office. And then he signed. Because the signature meant something again. Because it had always meant something even when they'd tried to buy it, even when they'd tried to bury it, even when it would have been so much easier to just write his name and go home. The signature was the last honest thing in the whole business, Lena's father had said. And Ethan had spent 31 years and one very long night proving him right. The jet flew a week later. Vivian was on it. She insisted, said she wouldn't ask anyone to fly an aircraft. She wouldn't fly herself, not ever again. And Ethan and Lena rode along, and it climbed into a clear sky, and cruised smooth and steady and true, and every part of it, every bolt and wire and servo was exactly what it claimed to be. It flew flawlessly. But the flawless flight was never the point, and all three of them knew it. Ethan looked out the window at the ground falling away below, and he thought about how the real victory wasn't the plane in the air. The real victory was on the ground in the audit division. Lena ran in the protection that shielded the next mechanic who found something wrong in a system that no longer let silence or shortcuts or fear override the truth. The plane flying was just the proof. The system that made it safe to fly was the win. A single technician had refused to compromise his signature, and that one refusal, that one quiet act of a stubborn, honest man who wouldn't take $400,000 to write his name on a lie, had pulled down an 11-year conspiracy. Exposed a killer, saved a fleet, given a dead man's children back. The truth about their father, and built something that would keep people safe for years after everyone in that hangar was gone. No pilot had ever refused to fly that jet out of fear. They refused because a man's signature still meant something. And in the end, when the truth finally came into the light and stayed there, that was the only thing that had ever mattered. Ethan Carter had left his certification card on a table because he would not sign a lie. And that single refusal changed everything.